heard the stories.
A brutal murder in the Black Hills discovered today.
You've witnessed the horror. Now,
Police have arrested 17-year-old Jeff
Drove into evil.
look into the face of evil. Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2. Rated R. Starts Friday, October 27th.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to The Pod and the Pendulum, your horror movie podcast that is dedicated to covering every single horror movie franchise, one movie, and sometimes multiple episodes at a time. So I am your host, Mike Snoonian, joined once again by my co-host, Jerry Smith. Jerry, how are we feeling?
Dun, dun, dun. I am so ready for this.
You've got the gloves on. You've got the mouth guard in.
I'm feeling, for some reason, I'm feeling extra just like ornery tonight. I don't know why.
When I dialed up earlier, you had like the theme from Rocky in the background. And your sounds of you like hitting big slabs of meat. So.
I want you, Balboa. I want you.
Oh my god, hey woman. Oh, I do the whole clubber laying. Hey woman, why don't you come down here? Tell me what a real man looks like. So, oh, Mr. T. My favorite Simpson joke of all time is like when Homer goes to the financial advisor and he's like all the mistakes he's made. And he's like, you know, I lost money in Rocky 3. And they're like, wait a minute, you bet against Rocky? I bet on Mr. T. So favorite wow. Simpsons bit of all time.
See, that's how you know. That's how you know that we're so excited to talk about the movie of the week because we're already going into like Simpsons and Rocky.
Absolutely, that's what we're gonna do. We're switching gears. We're now a pop culture, not pop culture podcast. No, I actually am excited tonight because tonight we are going to be talking about Blair Witch 2, the Book of Shadows, or the Book of Shit Shows, however you want it. No. Wait a minute, let me back up. So, as a mental health professional, as a counselor, one of the things we talk about is positive self-talk, positive thinking, cognitive restructuring to change the way we look at things. So I'm very interested tonight to see if our guest, the estimable, oh, you know what? I cannot even fucking say it. I am so slap happy. The esteemed Jinx from Bloody Disgusting and the Scream Addicts podcast. He is here to school us and educate us on why Book of Shadows is better than the reputation suggests from some people. So, Jinx, how are we doing tonight?
Oh, I'm great. I don't feel like I've walked into an ambush at all. I do want to say I don't know who told you I was esteemed in any way. So definitely want to counter that. But no, I don't know. I'm excited. I didn't realize initially when I said I would do this episode that I would be the only person here to defend it. You know, I thought I would have a little bit of backup, but you know, maybe that tracks because I've been defending this movie for nearly 20 years now. I found very little in the way of support along the way. So, you know, this is just more of the same. I'm ready to take my lumps for loving this movie.
There are going to be no lumps. I hope there are going to be no lumps. So we try to, and our thing is like, look, we're going to be critical of the movie, but I think we're going to try to give it its just due and hopefully take no undue shots at it. I mean, it's not like it's something like a real piece of shit like Mandy. So, you know,
come on.
Oh, you.
Oh. Worse.
No, in all seriousness, though, like one of my favorite things about doing this podcast has been to kind of dissect even films that I'm not a huge fan of. I mean, from the beginning, I said I don't really care for the Scream movies, but it was so much fun to hear people that actually liked them talk about why, you know, or Jason Goes to Hell. Sorry, Adam Marcus's wife. You know, we talked about, you know, how I'm not crazy about it, but it was so much fun listening to you guys talk about how you were. So I'm really excited about tonight.
Yep. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see, you know, what new we can pick up overall from, you know, just from a conversation among friends about the movie overall. So, you know, we'll definitely not walking into an ambush. Yes. Maybe the Book of Shadows was the friends we made along the way. I never get tired of that joke. It's so bad. So, Jinx, tell us a little bit, like, what we like to know is, like, when we put out like this is the series we're going to cover, like you said, you were the first one to say like I want Book of Shadows. Like you were adamant, like this is the one I'm going to cover. What was it about this movie? What was that said like I want to come on and talk about this?
Well, I guess I should say when I heard that you all were planning on covering the Blair Witch, franchise, I really did want to be a part of the first episode. I adore the first movie. I think it's brilliant. I really do. I think it's one of the best horror movies ever made. I have vivid memories of watching it, opening night at my local theater with a completely packed house. And, even back then, even before cell phones were, that much of a thing, you would still have rowdy audiences, people who would talk back to the screen, especially in a movie like that, in the small town that I lived in. And yet there was something about the power of the movie that it just held everybody in its thrall. Like 385 seat auditorium, completely packed, and not a peep throughout the bulk of that film, except when people would jump or laugh at Mike. Mm-hmm. And I'm always chasing that sort of a thrill, as where every time I go to watch a horror movie, I'm hoping that it will be at least in part as powerful as that showing of Blair Witch was. And I'm a huge fan of that movie, even 2 decades on. So I wanted to be a part of that episode, but I was told that the episode was booked, and I was really sad. So the next thing that I said was, okay, at least give me Book of Shadows. I know not that many people are going to be gunning to rap about that movie and to talk about their love for it. And I guess if I'm the only guy here who is going to be sort of defending the film, I'll go ahead and say this. I guess I don't know. I'm going to 8 Mile my way to victory here by robbing you 2 of your insults by getting to them first. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
So let me start by saying this. Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2 is a terrible Blair Witch Project sequel. Terrible sequel. It destroys the first film's carefully crafted mythology. It fights against the extended universe of spin-offs there were at the time. Even though Book of Shadows tie-in book tried to rectify that, but never mind. It failed to capture the first film's frights. It's not very scary at all. It's certainly nowhere near as scary as the first film. And, then the script sometimes features dialogue that can cause the occasional eye roll, or is just too plain on the nose when grappling with its themes, which are sometimes presented in a fairly ham-fisted way. This is a movie that certainly has its flaws, and yet I still find plenty about the film that I truly love. There is enough there that keeps me coming back yearly. The Blair Witch Project is a Halloween season viewing every year. Sometime in October, I'm going to pop that movie in and watch it. And equally, sometime in November, I'm going to pop in Book of Shadows and watch it too, once a year, just to remind myself, how much I enjoy it. And, maybe also to try and see why people dislike it. It's not that it's that hard to see why people dislike it. I understand. I get it. I'm not here to try and convince either of you that this is a better movie than you think it is, because I've been doing that for damn near 2 decades with everybody else. And I know that it just doesn't work. But I will at least sing its praises on my end as best I can.
So you said something interesting there that's only tangentially related. I love this idea of seasonal viewings, and you said like this is a movie that I watch Halloween every season with the first movie, every Halloween season. This is in the rotation. Just for shits and giggles, before we dive deep into the movie, I would like to know from each of you guys what you consider appropriate seasonal Halloween viewing. For example, I like the Friday the 13th movies. I love the Elm Street movies. I don't watch those during late September through October.
No, I'm the same exact way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
So what does a movie have? What kind of qualities do you think it needs to have in order to be? Because we're getting into the spooky season.
I think that the opening of Halloween 4 perfectly sums up what kind of movie should be a Halloween season movie. You know what I mean? I love Halloween. I love horror films that actually take place or invoke that kind of tone. Halloween 4, Trick or Treat, man. God damn, if Carpenter hadn't named his film Halloween, Trick or Treat should have been named Halloween, because it is that it just sums it up perfectly. Or even more recently, some people might not like it. I thought it was charming, but Candy Corn, that movie, like, it's obviously a first film. It's amateurish at times, but I enjoyed the hell out of it, and it gives you that feeling of a movie that you would want to watch during the fall season.
I suppose my choices are probably going to be boring, but I mean, honestly, just the Halloween franchise and Trick or Treat, it's pretty much with those. With the exception of Resurrection, I have to watch the entire franchise every October. And I hold off on Trick or Treat until night of. I think it was probably 4 or 5 years ago when I realized I kept trying to watch, Halloween 1 and 2. Those were my go-tos for Halloween night. And at a certain point, I sort of folded in Trick or Treat until I decided, you know what, this doesn't really need to be a triple feature. And, if you put a gun to my head, it's going to be Carpenter's original and then Trick or Treat, which I think is maybe, out of the two, maybe my favorite seasonal, movie. Sure. I think it better represents the holiday than Carpenter's original, which I adore, which I love. Of course, it's a masterpiece. But Trick or Treat. That's a dull answer. I will say that I have gotten around to throwing on The Guest pretty close to Halloween now too.
Ooh, so that's good. That's really good.
Yeah, I like a movie that evokes the season of fall to it. I want the feeling like I need to go put on a sweater while I'm watching this movie and like sip on something warm at that point. And something doesn't necessarily have to be scary, but just maybe have a sense of being like really playful to it. So a lot of times, like, I'll go back to classic monsters like the Universal monsters and do a double feature of like James Whale's Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, and maybe follow that up with The Invisible Man and The Wolfman, movies that I think are fun and charming, and to me, like, just remind me of like Halloween season growing up, are my go-to staples. So.
Another one. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that brought to mind that I'll just throw these two titles out quickly. But Sleepy Hollow and Something Wicked This Way Comes are also two movies that not necessarily Halloween night viewing material, but definitely throughout the month of October. I think they are. They kind of perfectly capture exactly what you were talking about, I think, to me.
Another one that popped in my head was The Lady in White.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I mean, it just feels like that feeling when you're a kid and you had those like cheap Halloween costumes, like it makes me feel like it's Halloween anytime I watch that movie.
I would say a modern movie for me that fits that bill would be The Woman in Black, the first Woman in Black movie with Daniel Radcliffe from Hammer Studios, like a classic ghost story that is spooky and fun, and I think really well done, like a classic ghost story. That is the kind of thing I love to watch overall.
Have you seen the television version from the 80s?
I want to say that on my old site, it was all on YouTube, and I think like, hey, here's like all the episodes on YouTube, and just link to it on All Things Horror at one point because they were up there from like the BBC. I don't remember if I actually sat down and watched it, but I know that it has an incredible reputation.
Yeah, it is very good. If you like the, so many people call out the 80s movies being so much, superior to the Daniel Radcliffe film, and which I think is arguable. I really like both. Hell, I even liked The Angel of Death, which came out not long after. I enjoyed all three films, but if you have not seen the television version of that story, there is one incredible fright in it that none of the movies top, none of the following movies anyway. So it's worth watching for that alone.
I'm going to have to hunt down a legal copy of that and give that a watch then. I've also, and Jerry, you mentioned this when we interviewed Ben Rock, the WUNF Halloween special.
Oh, yeah.
It's something else I watch every single year.
Yeah. I adore that movie so much. Like, I just think that movie is just absolutely perfect. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's just so much fun, and it's someone who grew up in the 80s and remembers like when TV got to be a little bit weird on the local stations. It just reminds me of that so much, and it's just, I think that the way they, if I remember correct, one of the ways they marketed that is they would go to conventions and just leave like bags of VHS copies on the road for people to find. And
I showed it to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I showed it to my kids, and I didn't tell them that it was fake. And they were afterwards. They were like, "Oh my god!" They thought I showed them like basically a snuff movie, you know?
Yeah, which for us is not really outside the realm of possibility. So
I'm like, and then CPS got involved. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, speaking of snuff movies, let's get back to the Blair Witch Project.
Oh yeah.
Because
no, go ahead.
No, it's all right.
I'm joking.
So,
well, I mean, here's the deal. I want to start by just one thing. You know, when you think of the Blair Witch Project, I don't know about you guys, but obviously you think of music by P.O.D., Nickelback, Project 86, and Marilyn Manson, right?
Right.
I mean, you know, they might have been on Josh's second mixtape. It's possible.
Right.
Damn it.
Well, Josh's mixtape had things like Typo Negative, things like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, let's get it straight here. He had some good taste.
We're not, you know.
So you're saying you don't like Manson?
No, I do, but I mean, come on.
You don't like Bo? You don't like Godhead?
No. It's just like I just, and you know, honestly, it's an easy joke. You know, Blair Witch Project, you have to throw in POD and Nickelback.
Of course. Well, when is it not a good time for Nickelback? I mean, really, like, always.
You know, I never thought I would hear that sentence in my life. When is it not a good time for Nickelback?
Yeah. I mean, I think what this world needs right now is more Nickelback, really.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go back to the fall of 1999. Artisan has this unexpected hit on their hands. I knew the movie would do well, but $250 million worldwide by the fall of 1999. It seems like everybody has seen the Blair Witch Project, and the natural thing at that point is like, we need to make more of them. There's a few problems, though. Number one, people walk out of the Blair Witch Project after it got big, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't seem to like the movie very much when they walk out of it.
It made a lot of money, but at the same time, I mean, there was such a huge backlash. You know, it seemed like it, even like prior to Twitter and all that stuff, it seemed like the Blair Witch Project was something that people always talked down about. You know, and I think it might have been the filming style, but in a lot of ways, I think it was that gut reaction to something becoming popular. You know, I was just talking about this with Justin Beam about something. Like it feels like if something gets to a certain like popularity, it seems like it's just an easy target.
For example, Nickelback.
Exactly. No, exactly. You know, I'll joke about Nickelback, or my wife wants to hang me every time I mention Buck Cherry. Mm-hmm. But it's like those are easy targets. You know what I mean? And I feel like the Blair Witch was so successful that once the hype and once the buzz wore off, it was such an easy target for people just to like hate.
I wonder how much part of that too was the fact that some people felt like, you know, they had one pulled over on them, you know, that they had been tricked. That
most people did.
Yeah, I wonder if, you know, I wonder how many people walked out loving the fact that they saw something different, and then, you know, they turned on it after they realized that they had been duped a bit.
Yeah. I think that is such a good point. I think that's 100%. And I think people felt like the wool had been pulled over their eyes. Like, wait a minute, I thought this was real. What do you mean it's not real? And then they felt really stupid at that point.
What does that say to people, though, that they were pissed that they weren't watching a snuff movie? You know?
Late 90s were a wild fucking time, man.
I miss them.
You know, and I can relate a personal story here. 2 years ago, I was driving out to Telluride Horror with Brad McCarg, who was on our Jason Takes Manhattan episode, and a couple other people. And, you know, we all have our, like, iPhones. We're, like, each taking turns playing different things, you know, on the 6-hour drive from Denver to Telluride. So I put on a couple episodes of the Black Tapes podcast. And I don't know if you guys have listened to that at all.
No.
Sure.
It's the first season and is incredible. And it's kind of diminishing returns after that. But it's basically Serial meets The Exorcist, or Serial meets The X-Files might be a better way to put it. It's about this
subscribing
investigate. Cannot recommend the first season enough. But it came out like in the wake of shows like Serial, pushing the boundaries of what podcasts could do in terms of being informative, but also very entertaining. And it's very much like they play it straight. Like they don't play it like, hey, this is a work of fiction, so you think you're listening to reality. There's just enough there to make you think what you're listening to is real. And the first couple episodes, like everyone in the car is like espousing theories, and maybe it's this, maybe it's this. I wonder what that, I've never heard of this. And after like an hour, I'm like, you guys know this is fiction, right? And from that point on, like the next episode, everything got picked apart in terms of how it was put together. That's dumb. That's stupid. Why would they do that? And it was like, they felt angry because like they had been tricked. So I think that, Jinx, to your point, there's something to be said for that. That's when people realize they didn't just come out of seeing 3 people get murdered. They felt like there was something, like they were tricked, and they didn't like that feeling.
Like we said in the previous episode, I mean, that movie, it scared the living hell out of me. I kind of knew that going into it that it was fictional. I knew it wasn't real, but I mean, there was still, my dad picked me up from wherever I was and told me that it was real. So even reading that it wasn't, there was still this little nugget of like, you know what I mean? Like if you find something as a kid, your parents tell you something's not real or something like that, but in the back of your head, you still think that boogeyman is in the closet. You know what I mean? Like, and I think going into Blair Witch, I still had that little fear inside of me, thinking that I was seeing something dangerous, something, something really dangerous. So I can understand people being upset by that, but at the same time, like, it's almost like the placebo effect, Like you tell someone something, they start believing it, and it gives them a physical reaction, It's weird.
Agree.
And I will say, for my part, watching that original movie, I think I'd read about it in Fango by that point. I had, I'd watched Curse of the Blair Witch, and, you can watch something like that and be tricked just enough into thinking that possibly, maybe it's real, but also in many ways you could tell it's like, no, this is
of course,
this is not real. This is a gag, but it's just a very well made gag. And yet, I knew it was fake, and yet when I bought a ticket and sat down, I was all too willing, just for that hour and a half, to believe that it was completely real. And I walked out shaking and scared and thrilled, and then I went back home.
Well,
which was situated right next to a forest.
Right.
And I could hear the sounds of the forest all night long, and it fucking terrified me. And I miss that. I miss that feeling. I miss walking out of a theater and feeling like that. It doesn't happen that often anymore.
I think marketing plays a big hand in that. I mean, you sit in a theater and, the Evil Dead remake, you're promised on the posters that it's the scariest movie ever made, or Paranormal Activity when it came out, the scariest movie of all time, like you sit down, and that it's probably just hype, but you sit down having heard that or read that it's like, I think it's an inevitable letdown, no matter like if it's really good or it's not.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like if you tell someone, don't think about the color red, all they're going to do from that point on is think about the color red. If you challenge an audience and say, this is the scariest thing you're ever going to see, this is the funniest movie you're ever going to see, or this is the scariest movie since The Exorcist, you're setting yourself up for failure in one way or another. Because those are just too lofty. It's like, let something be, instead of being the next Exorcist, let it be the first of what it is. Exactly. And enjoy it for what it is.
No, there's always this need to compare things or label things, and I think that hurts films more than it it helps them.
Okay. So this is a long way around of saying Artisan has a pretty unique problem on its hand. On one hand, they have a movie that was a massive hit, and they know there's an audience, and Artisan is, in the habit of wanting to make more money. So the natural thing is they're going to want to do a sequel. Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick by this time, they wanted to go make romantic comedies. They really didn't want to make another horror movie, and they also were pretty aware of like what was being said about the Blair Witch Project and how the hype bubble had kind of crashed. And they were saying like, look, we're willing to revisit this. We have all these ideas, obviously, with our mythology that we can go back and do. Like, we would love to do a movie on just Rust and Parr. We would love to go back and revisit, like, Ellie Kedward. And they had an idea for a movie very similar to what we saw, almost 15 years later with Robert Eggers and The Witch. But they're like, let's let this thing breathe a little bit. Like, we just released this movie. We've been working on it for like over 3 years. Like, let's let this thing simmer down and then go back when people want more of it. And Arneson said, nope, you have to have this thing out by October of 2000, which is insane.
Yeah.
You had a 1 year turnaround on something that took 3 years to create.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's a classic example of just something being rushed so much that, Artisan wanted to have something out there. They didn't realize that by rushing that, I think it set the film up and set Berlinger up just for failure. Mm-hmm. You have to let those things breathe. You have to work on development. What movie that was sped up that quickly ended up being good? I can't think of a single one.
That was my next question. Like, Jinx, can you think of a time when a movie or any artistic project was given a hard, fast deadline with nothing out behind it, and it was a rush job that it ended up being like successful?
If we want to stick with Lionsgate, would you consider the Saw sequels?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I enjoyed the hell out of Saw 2. Arguably, I think it's a better film than Saw, and I love Saw 3. After that, it's diminishing returns. But yeah, no, those first three. They just what was it for 7 years, 6 years?
Yeah, year after year.
They were hitting every Halloween. That's kind of amazing. And then Paranormal Activity tried it for its first three installments, and then after that, it was a bit staggered. But yeah, no, with some of those were very good and some weren't. But
well, some people think VHS 2 is better than the first film, and that was kind of rushed. Yeah.
Oh, it is. It is. God, if for no other reason than for Safe Haven. My God.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So, do you think then that Lionsgate, or rather Artisan, do you think that they are trying to tackle this problem by holding onto that release date, realizing that they're up against the wall, and the best solution that somebody can come up with is, hey, the first movie was essentially a documentary. Why don't we just get a documentary filmmaker to give us a sequel?
See, that's where my biggest disappointment comes. And I don't mean like my expectations were more important than the film. Like, I really think the expectations are dangerous. But you get someone who has made some of the best documentaries of all time. And that's great. But at the same time, he had nothing but, kind of hatred for the first film. And that's always just rubbed me the wrong way. Why get someone that didn't appreciate the first film that worked to make something kind of continuing that?
I think that's why, when I said at the very beginning that I think the Blair Witch 2 is a terrible sequel, I do. I think it's a terrible sequel in so many ways. Viewing it as a standalone film, or even kind of a great extension of Berlinger's documentary work, I think it works on that level. I remember sitting down and watching Blair Witch 2 for the first time. I was working in a movie theater, the same theater that I watched, Blair Witch 1 the previous year, but I had made friends with enough managers there that I could slip in from time to time and do the after hours screenings of movies before they were released to the public. The film prints had to be built up, put on a platter, and then run to make sure that all of the reels were put on in the correct order. There were no missplices, anything like that. And if it was a movie that I was dying to see, I would be like, look, can you please let me watch this? And of course, Blair Witch 2 is going to be one of those. And I was watching with two managers who were pals, and I remember maybe 15, 20 minutes in, I just had this sinking feeling that oh God, this isn't even remotely what I want out of a Blair Witch sequel.
Mm-hmm.
This is not what I want. Why are they doing this? You know, and at a certain point, I just kind of relaxed and I was like, okay, whatever this is, let's see how it goes. And then at a certain point, I realized that, you know, especially looking at Paradise Lost and Paradise Lost 2, which had just come out right before this, you know, it really did feel like Berlinger was wrestling with some of his concerns as a documentary filmmaker, only, you know, in this narrative form. And by the end of the movie, I was walking out grinning ear to ear, sort of bouncing out of the theater. And the two guys that I watched it with absolutely hated it. And that has pretty much been my experience ever since. I still dig the movie.
Do you think that...
Sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Do you think that it suffers the same kind of thing that Halloween 3 does? That if it was called something else, then people would have appreciated it more?
I think if you removed or simply even renamed the Blair Witch mythology, if you called it something else, but it was obviously a commentary on the Blair Witch movie and phenomenon, and if it had come out a year after that first film, I think people would be so much more forgiving. I think if you divorced it from the franchise that it is taking pot shots at, even though it belongs to the same fucking franchise, I think that absolutely people would appreciate it more.
That's what's always bothered me about it, is that there are definite pot shots being taken at the first film. I mean, it seems to like viciously mock the first movie at times, and I think that's where it lost me the first time I watched it. It's just like I feel really weird watching this because this movie hates the movie it's a sequel to.
Yeah, and I get that, and I don't know what it says about me being a huge fan of the first film that I can also be a fan of this movie too.
Mm-hmm. No, totally.
And yet I am. You know, it's funny that you mentioned Halloween 3. You know, it's very much like, maybe that's part of the reason that I love the movie, is that, you know, right out of the gate with the first sequel, we wind up with a film that is, you know, taking a pretty big swing and doing its own thing and not simply rehashing the previous movie, which it would have been so easy to do. It would have been so easy to throw another group of actors out in the woods, follow them with the shaky cam and release it into theaters. And you know what? It wouldn't have made even half of what the first film did, but it would have made a profit, and they could have run it into the ground over the course of a few sequels. But instead, we get a very smart documentary filmmaker who is basically, grinding an axe a bit when it comes to his thoughts on the previous movie and the phenomenon. And I think, you know, it is kind of like Halloween 3. It stands apart in that way. It's a Nightmare on Elm Street 2 in a way, in how it stands apart from the original movie. You know, I can watch Nightmare 2 and think, you know what? This movie doesn't feel like it really respects the previous movie much at all. And yet on its own, it's interesting. You know, I don't know that I love Nightmare 2, but still, you know, Halloween 3, I think, is the same way. They tried doing something quite different from what had come before. We didn't need to see Michael Myers again. I still don't think we need to see any more Michael Myers. Why? You know, Halloween 3, I think, was pissed on for a good decade and a half before people started to come around to it. Why people still treat Halloween 3 as some sort of underloved black sheep is kind of beyond me at this point. People have been praising that movie for the last 20 years. But, you know, I keep waiting as a fan of Blair Witch 2 for people to come around on it. And at this point, I mean, I don't think it's going to happen.
I've always been obsessed with alternate cuts. You know, I was never a fan of Halloween 6, but I was really excited to see the producer's cut, to see if maybe there was something in the original intention, original vision that, you know, would have made me appreciate it. And I've always wanted to see Berlinger's cut of the second Blair Witch. I mean, everything from wanting the film to open with Frank Sinatra's Witchcraft, you know, before the studio made him do Disposable Teens by Marilyn Manson. Like, it just seems like he had a completely different vision. And though I am pretty sure that I still wouldn't dig it that much, I would like to see what it could have been.
Yeah, I'm with you. I always wanted to see Berlinger's cut of the movie too, much as I want to see any director's original vision for any movie, you know, certainly. Mm-hmm. But, you know, maybe especially this one, because I always had the feeling that well, maybe his version is better than what we have. And if people could see it, then maybe everybody would come around on this movie, and then I wouldn't feel so terribly alone. But that said, it was actually on this last minute revisit of the movie for this conversation that I considered that I'm not sure his director's cut would top what we already have. Now, hear me out. He talks about, sure, wanting to replace the Marilyn Manson song that opens the film with Frank Sinatra's Witchcraft. Now, I like that song. It's a cool song, sure. But, Disposable Teens gives that film sort of an energy and a darkness right off the bat. Whereas Witchcraft, I think, in that opening sequence, would almost start us out on kind of a note of irony, which might be fine. I don't know. I'd like to see it. But, I kind of like what's there already. And I don't know. I don't know if that would be the strongest foot to lead off on. Same thing with, listening to his commentary. Of course, he takes loads of pot shots at the movie for, the many changes that were imposed. And, he talks about not wanting the gore flashes sort of strewn throughout the movie. And I get that. I mean, it happens too often. They're kind of cheaply done. They do provide a couple of jolts and, keep the atmosphere a bit dark and oppressive. We know that everything we're witnessing is going somewhere really, really horrible. We just don't know when and where. But, so I don't know that removing all of those would strengthen the movie.
Kind of to touch on what you said that, you don't know if it would strengthen the movie. Berlinger's always been outspoken with saying that even his original intention was to ultimately be focused on that they were mentally unstable people and that it was a human enemy, not a supernatural one. And that's another element that just, I think, makes the film suffer so much because, the Blair Witch was real in the first film. I mean, it's been said by the creators, there's all these theories, but yeah, it is a supernatural film. And so to make a sequel of that where, I mean, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's a movie within a movie, but at the same time, taking even a supernatural element out of it, it seems like the movie itself doesn't even know what it wants to be. And it seems like any charm of the first film is gone. And yeah, I do agree with you. If you take the Blair Witch part out of it, it might be entertaining. But the fact is, it is a Blair Witch film. So, I mean, as a viewer, should we be expected to separate it from the first film when it is the second film? You know what I mean?
There's a nihilism and a sense of detached irony that runs throughout Book of Shadows that makes it really hard for me to stomach. And Jinx, I understand what you're saying, where you're like, well, this Marilyn Manson song gives it a jolt of energy. I hear that Marilyn Manson song, and all I think is someone in the marketing department is the Steve Buscemi "Hello, Fellow Kids" meme come to life.
And you know what? That's probably 100% exactly what that decision was. I'm certain of it. I would actually put money on you being entirely right on that. But it still works for me. And I don't know, I can't even say why. I don't know why it works so damn well when Poe's Haunted comes over the end credits. Jerry, I know you're not a fan of the soundtrack.
I like Project 86.
I maybe Witchcraft would work better. Maybe it would be better without the gore bits. And he even talked about in his commentary presenting the movie entirely chronologically so that we don't get those kind of flash forwards of Jeff and Steven and Kim at the station. But I think that makes the film work so much better, setting us up to know that something horrible has happened. We don't know what, and that our leads are being blamed for it. It gives the movie kind of a drive that I don't think it would have otherwise. I'd be more than happy to be proven wrong on this. I want to see Berlinger's cut. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But I would be first in line to buy that Blu-ray. I'd love for him to get the chance to present his original vision, but I'm also really happy with what we have.
So part of what Berlinger says early on is when we talked about him not being a fan of the first movie and somewhat being hostile to the movie. Berlinger says he felt it was very irresponsible for the Blair Witch Project to be presented as it was, to be presented as a documentary, to be presented as actual footage of actual events. As he calls himself as someone that traffics in reality, and he's very clear. So I'm not saying reality TV. I'm talking about documenting the actual human experience. He felt that for entertainment to try to blur that line, for a work of fiction to try to blur that line, starts heading into dangerous territory. And I'll say this about Berlinger. In some ways, he's very prescient. He says in 99 or 2000 that once you start presenting fiction as reality, we're already electing politicians on sound bites who can sound the best in a 22-second news clip rather than who can present the best ideas for how to move forward as a country or as a community. So if it becomes too easy to fool people, to fake people out. He says that some poll says that about 40% of the people that leave the Blair Witch Project believe that those are actual events that happened. And we discussed that a little bit earlier in our show. And as a documentarian, that is something he finds very scary. And he finds very unsettling. I say this is just taking a medium and taking storytelling and presenting it as in a new way, and presenting fiction in a new way, and taking advantage of these new tools that are available to you, very similar to what Bram Stoker does in his novel of Dracula, which is presented as diary entries, news journals, letters back home to people. You know, you can in some ways call the novel of Dracula a found footage novel.
But I don't think, was he really so upset with the film itself or how it was marketed?
Yes, both. He thought it was, unless I'm misreading, his idea was not just that it was marketed as reality, but this idea that you're presenting this footage as reality is dangerous and entertainment itself. Now, the other thing he says is he felt insulted as a documentary filmmaker. And I'm going to just bring up really quick. This is a interview with Joe Berlinger from Cut Print Film. An interview he did in 2016 after the Blair Witch had come out and kind of like disappeared off the radar very quickly. So this is from him. What I objected to at the time was that somehow degraded video quality that is shaky and poorly shot has become equated with reality and what the documentary and not is. It's wallowing in the worst cliches of bad documentary making somehow equals reality. As a maker of well-crafted, well-shot documentary films, I don't want to pursue that path when they ask me to do a sequel.
Okay, but just let me interject with that.
And I have my own thoughts too, so please.
He's offended. He's offended that they're making a mockery out of great documentary filmmaking. Yet he makes a mockery of great narrative filmmaking with Book of Shadows.
He was picking up the stone and he was throwing it right back. I can't knock him entirely for that.
So I think what it is like there's a fundamental misunderstanding on Berlinger's part of what the Blair Witch Project actually was. Because it's not the actual documentary of the Blair Witch Project takes up about less than 20 minutes, somewhere around like maybe 12 minutes of the movie, because it's around minute 22 or 23 that Josh, Heather, and Mike go into the woods and disappear. That's when they get lost. It's the last thing they really shoot for the documentary is the footage of the two fishermen kind of like sparring back and forth on whether or not the legend of the Blair Witch is true. And even before that, not everything they film is actually part of a documentary. It's them going food shopping in a supermarket, and it's them, getting drunk in the hotel room. Those aren't things that were going to be in the actual documentary. There are moments in the Blair Witch Project where you see what Heather intended to be part of the documentary. When she does the reading in front of Coffin Rock, when she's at the cemetery. That is what, if they had completed their actual film, that's what the documentary would have looked like. And it looks and it sounds like a real documentary.
Yeah.
Josh, Mike, and Heather getting lost in the woods is not a documentary. It is three scared kids coping with what's going on the only way they know how.
No, it's what she says in that first film. You know, it's all I have left, basically. You know, them being shaky with it, that is out of the fear. You know, that is out of just wanting to film stuff, you know, mostly for reference or in case something does happen to them. Mm-hmm. They know they're not getting out, like we said in the last episode. So she's filming it for her loved ones, basically, which is why she apologizes at the end. You know, if she would have been able to complete the documentary, it would have been just as good as, you know, well shot and just as thorough as Berlinger's Paradise Lost would have been, you know?
I just remember, so far as Berlinger's stance, I get it. You know, I understand. I remember having this professor in college. I took this documentary film class once, and I can't tell you how often he drilled it into our heads the importance of, oh God, what was the term? Like Kino Pravda. You know, like the truth in film, you know, the idea that even when you're cutting, even when you're editing footage, even without commentary, you know, there is a lie inherent in that, you know, and you sort of have to wrestle with that and stay as close to the truth as possible. I get somebody who deals with sort of the heavy subject matter that Berlinger does, how he would feel, you know, maybe I don't understand him being entirely offended at a horror movie using found footage as, you know, the way in which to tell its story. I mean, hell, what? The fucking Cannibal Holocaust was what, 20, 25 years old by that point? You know, but I do understand his concerns at the movie being pushed as something that's real. Because you know what? Ultimately, it's harmless, right? It's just a horror movie. It's just a bit of fun. It's entertainment. You go, you have a laugh or a jump or, you know, a scream, and then you walk out, and then you find out that it's not real, and maybe you're a little bummed, but and you go on about your life. But then again, you know, when in the age before, you know, Google and Twitter, social media of any sort, you know, the internet was still in its infancy, it felt like, you know, for the message to reach the masses that this thing is real and to get them to turn out in droves, which certainly, I mean, I think the box office bears that out, that, you know, for them to walk away and eventually find out that Santa isn't fucking real, you know, I wonder what that does to somebody on a very small level. Like there is a chip taken out of them, one of many to come down the road, where people, you know, maybe they don't trust their eyes anymore. Maybe they don't trust what they're told in the way that they once did. I do wonder about the danger of that. And, you know, and maybe that's silly, again, to hold, again, a fun horror movie to task for something like that. But at least I understand why, excuse me, why he would be, you know, concerned at that, and why he would want to make a movie to examine that and sort of look at it and, yeah, criticize it. And I think that's, you know, how many horror movies can you know, which Friday the 13th sequel really took a hard look at what had come before? You know,
Jerry, do your thing. Do it, Jerry.
Which
do your line. Do it.
You know, honestly, though, with that being said, I think the final chapter does, because, you know, if you take Jason out of I can't even do it with a straight face. If you take Jason out of that movie, you still have a wonderful character-driven movie. You know, I feel like the final chapter did exactly what you're saying.
But yeah, no, so I guess that's why I appreciate Book of Shadows, is because it is bold in that way. You know, a filmmaker came in and, you know, in the course of a year, crafted a movie that, you know, wrestled with something that obviously was a concern of its maker. And I don't know how he slipped as much as he did by Artisan. I don't know how everything made it to the screen. I don't know how it wasn't hacked up even more than, you know, it was. I don't know if it was hacked up, but I mean, obviously it was altered. But, you know, I find that fascinating, that the movie exists in such a way. You know, of course, you know, maybe the hell of it is that he was making a movie that was meant to stand outside of the continuity of the first movie. We're meant to watch that, and I still kind of view it that way, if I'm being honest. I mean, if we're talking about what is canon in Blair Witch, and this is no knock on Blair Witch 2, but I kind of count, you know, the original film. And even though I'm not even a huge fan of it, I include, you know, Wingard's Blair Witch. You know, those are the two movies in the Blair Witch franchise. Book of Shadows stands outside of that to me. And it was meant to entirely, you know, it was meant to be a part of, for lack of a better term at the moment, the real world. And then, Artisan did their damnedest to sort of rope in the movie back into canon, and back into the continuity of the original movie. And with the presentation that they had done with, Blair Witch and Curse of the Blair Witch and all of the, those fun spin-off novels and the Blair Witch dossier and the Confession of Rustin Parr, even long beyond the point that we, the viewers and fans realized that, Blair Witch wasn't real. They were still pushing it as, all of this happened. All of this is happening. This is completely real. And then Berlinger gave them a movie that's like, it wasn't real. We're examining the phenomenon, and this is what comes from that. And, we're going to examine the hysteria that came about from the result of people believing that this was real. And I kind of wish that he had been left alone on that front. But, they made him include that opening that, calls the movie essentially a dramatized reenactment of real events. Which
I know
he didn't like fucking that counter to what his intent with the movie was. And then they released, the guy who wrote the Blair Witch dossier, which was fucking fantastic. He wrote a Book of Shadows spinoff that, essentially says, hey, that movie that you're about to watch in theaters, it was all real. Now those are actors playing parts, but here's what actually happened. You can read the case file of the Black Hills murders or whatever the fuck they called them, and I gotta admit, I didn't read the Book of Shadows spinoff book until just before the Adam Wingard sequel hit a few years back. That third film sort of kickstarted a franchise revisit for me that saw me not only rewatching the first two movies, but I revisited those spinoff novels. Does anyone remember Cade Merrill, Heather Donahue's cousin? The Secret Confession of Rustin Parr, the Blair Witch dossier, the comics, the spinoff docs. Not only Curse of the Blair Witch, but Burkittsville 7 and Shadow of the Blair Witch. I fucking loved all that stuff. I honestly think the Shadow of the Blair Witch is a better sequel to the Blair Witch Project than Book of Shadows. It's a better sequel in the way the Book of Shadows is not a good sequel. But I'd gone through most of that stuff before just being a fan. I never got around to the video games, but I had never read the Book of Shadows spinoff until Wingard's film was about to hit. And, much like Shadow of the Blair Witch, it does a pretty good job of trying to pull Book of Shadows back into the world of the first movie, which again runs counter to what Berlinger was trying to do. And there are, I mean, what's his name? D.A. Stern. I think he did a decent enough job trying at that point to keep it all in continuity. But I mean, there are some hurdles that just can't be cleared. If you're to buy that the feature film is a dramatized retelling of real events, then I mean, are we meant to believe that the filmmakers then sought out actors to play quote unquote real people who just so happen to have nearly the same damn names as the people they're playing? I mean, you found that Jeffrey Donovan to play Jeffrey Patterson, fine. I mean, but you also found an Erica Learson to play an Erica Gearson, Tristan Schuyler to play Tristan Ryler, the worst one. Stephen Ryan, no. Stephen Barker Turner plays Stephen Ryan Parker. I mean, come the fuck on.
Book of Shadows really killed the franchise for a decade or any idea, because it kind of did. I mean, at the end of the day, really.
No, it did. It did.
He was so nice about all of it.
He was. He really was.
You could tell. I asked that question of, is there ever kind of a letdown, seeing your baby being kind of handled by other people, and there was a look on his face because he was doing video. There's a look on his face where you could tell he's like, "Yep."
Yeah. Yeah. You can definitely.
It's funny that you mentioned that too, because I know we had touched on this a bit during our last conversation, and of course I was scrolling through loads of stuff at the time. I was just kind of brushing up, and I think it might have even been something mentioned on the commentary. But Berlinger, again, it doesn't sound to me anyway like he hated the first film. I think the main rub for him was how it was marketed.
No,
really? Because he talked about how effective it was.
He years later said nice things about it, but in the moment he was offended that and I've seen this in a couple different places. He was offended that people thought shaky cam footage was what a documentary is, like people swinging the camera around wildly.
Yeah,
is what a documentary is. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. But I mean, there was something that I caught, like this piece where he talked about basically the sort of the horror of the piece and how effective it was, and the characters that it was. It mainly rested on them. He might have been I can't fucking speak right now. He might have even been talking about that when he was talking about crafting his own characters for Book of Shadows. But I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but it didn't sound like he outright hated the film as a tale.
I think in time he kind of lessened his vitriol towards it.
Right.
And he seems himself to hate Book of Shadows. I mean, I remember, God, this has been ages ago.
Because I do too.
There was a Horror Hound convention. I think it was the same one that they premiered the Cabal cut of Nightbreed at ages ago. But Clive Barker was actually there, and I didn't realize it, but fucking Berlinger was there at the time too. And it was later revealed
Clive Barker talked shit about Book of Shadows.
He might have. But they did an interview in the magazine that came out like a couple of months later, and apparently the reason he was there, he was filming footage for a Clive Barker documentary that, has yet to materialize. But he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, barely quoting, but he said something along the lines of he felt like he owed it to horror fans to give them something great like a documentary on Clive Barker after having inflicted Book of Shadows upon them. So
yeah, but he also inflicted the Ted Bundy movie, so when are we going to get another apology?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that yet.
I'm just being a dick.
Oh, it's one of those things where when you go back and look, and you have to, you have to go back and look and just scoreboard. All you have to do is look at the scoreboard. $50,000 to make, $250 million return, $15 million to make, $45 million, which is not, in and of itself, is good. If Book of Shadows came out today as a standalone movie, and we haven't even really recorded yet. I think this is gonna be edited in a very weird way because I have a head cold here and I'm a little bit loopy. If Book of Shadows, to your, you said this when we were recording the first time, if it just came out and was its own little thing, we would look at $15 million versus a $45 million investment and say, when are we getting another one? But I think it's like being the biggest kid at the kids' table at Thanksgiving. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like nobody wants to be that. It just I don't know. That analogy does not work. So I'm going to blame.
I liked it though. I'm
going to blame the cold medicine. Yeah, I'm going to blame the cold medicine.
But I do think too. I remember working at the movie theater at the time when the movie came out. I know I've mentioned this before, but opening weekend, The Blair Witch, it was all word of mouth that had come from the rollout in smaller cities, and of course, Curse of the Blair Witch, and of course that sort of the rumors that it was all real, right? And so opening night, massive auditorium, completely packed. And then 1 year later, opening night. Now, the movie hasn't been judged at this point. Nobody can say that it's a terrible movie outright, before the initial viewing, before the initial screening of the movie. And as I recall, I don't think it screened for critics, or maybe it did. But in any case, I was there opening night working, and I was expecting us to get stomped into the ground because of how busy the first film had been. And maybe 20 people, maybe 30 in the evening showings. So I think, I don't know if the movie was ever going to do that well, because I think so many people felt burned by the first one. I don't know if its financial failures can all be pinned against the movie itself. Certainly great word of mouth would have helped it have legs, and it did not have that at all. So
it did have Dracula on the soundtrack, though.
That's not nice.
And Nickelback. I think it's a really. I think it's a. This is going to be like Jason Goes to Hell all over again. This is
Jason feels like he's going to hell right now.
Ranger's wife is going to hate me.
Yeah. This is, I think that's a fair point. And I think when we interviewed Eduardo, one of the things he regrets is not taking advantage of like really doing another movie when they could have. But what turned him the final straw for him was when Artisan said, "Okay, it's December. We need a movie by October," and there's no script. Yeah, no script, no cast, no story.
He did tell us that, even though they were kind of against the idea of doing it so soon, that they did kind of humor the idea of making the sequel, of doing the kind of, prequel thing that we've all read about, the period piece. And that, yeah, I mean, like what Mike's saying right now, I mean, they said in December that they had to be done and completed and ready to be released by October. And I can't see how anyone could do that knowing that they're about to set themselves up for failure.
And I think like Eduardo and Myrick or Sanchez and Myrick were both, after the film came out and they were aware of the backlash, said if we just give this a year to breathe, if we come back in like 2 years, totally reasonable amount of time, you're going to have like more warm and fuzzy memories as opposed to like a lot of, I remember like I recommended to every single person I knew, horror fan or not, like go see this movie, go see the Blair Witch Project. And it's like the best thing I've seen in theaters ever. And I remember people coming back to me and being like, "You're out of your fucking mind. Like this movie's awful. Like it's not scary. I wasn't scared, And I remember like,
man, I don't get that, but
I don't get it either. Like I seriously don't understand it. Although I guess like if you're not, it was so different from what people were used to. And if you, if you're like an average horror fan, and nothing wrong with being an average horror fan, this isn't gatekeeping, but if you're someone that like at that time really loved like the Scream movies, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Halloween H2O, which is totally fine, like love those movies and do your thing. But if that's what you expected out of a horror movie, like this wasn't that. And I think when people went to see the Blair Witch Project and then the same summer went to see The Sixth Sense, which is a fantastic popcorn movie and gives audiences what it wants. When you compare the two side by side, like the average person going to the movie is probably going to gravitate more towards the latter.
That was a good fall too. Damn it. I'm the horror nerd who loves Scream, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and The Sixth Sense, and Blair Witch. But that fall, we had, going into it,
things. You can love all those things. There's room in the boat for everything.
See, we had the Blair Witch Project, we had the Sixth Sense, and we had fucking Stir of Echoes too.
Here's the thing, like you can love all those things, but as horror fans, let's be realistic. How many people realize that you don't have to stick to one kind of thing? Mm-hmm. Like I think people like us appreciate all subgenres, but there are people that's like, there are like the kind of snobby fans too. That's like, no, I won't be caught dead watching this stuff. But they want to watch. They want to watch Shyamalan, do his version of Hitchcock. That's their kind of thing because it feels like more like high art for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are people that are gonna, will go see like It Chapter 1, but would never go see, say, Hereditary or The Witch. And you know what? That's totally okay. Like not every movie has to be for every single person. Like there doesn't have to be some sort of like litmus test or gatekeeping that says unless you like these particular brands or styles of movies, you're not a true fan. Like it's okay to be a casual fan.
That and I think a big reason, and this is just me speculating, but I think another big reason why maybe Book of Shadows didn't hit as much is the marketing for the first film was so good and innovative, and it kind of immersed you into this feeling that even, like I said in the Sanchez episode, even though it's not real, just that kind of like angle of the marketing makes you excited to act like it is. Whereas you come to Book of Shadows, and how did they promote it? They had a 3-day online festival, and the winner won tickets to see Marilyn Manson and a private screening of Book of Shadows with Marilyn Manson. That's so like fantastical that it's just like the complete like antithesis of what made the original work and even what made the original marketing work and the excitement. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so like,
it bugged the hell out of me, that marketing too, that, it felt like you could tell the studio was trying to play it safe in that, how they presented it, especially the teaser trailer, which I think is just, what is it, like just an aerial shot of the Black Hills, and then we get a couple of shots of the characters. And I remember thinking, watching, both of the trailers that came out, it feels like they're trying to ride that line. They're trying to say, hey, you know that movie that you loved last year? Well, this is totally more of the same. But also, hey, do you remember that movie you hated last year? Well, this is going to be completely different. Yeah. So please, everybody, come together. Come see the sequel that we rushed out in less than a fucking year.
I was at Book of Shadows opening night when it came out. I remember, like, at the time I worked at, like, some retail home theater. Like, Circuit City was where I worked at the time. Like, and we had, like, a group of friends. We all worked together. And, like, we'd go, like, get a bite to eat and then go to a movie, like, more Friday nights than not. And I loved the first Blair Witch Project, even though I refused to go see it again in theaters because it scared me too much. And I remember going to see Book of Shadows, and it actually made me angry. And very few movies do that to me. It made me angry because I felt like I was being insulted for watching it. I felt like I was being insulted by the filmmaker for actually enjoying the first movie. I think there was a really derisive and just a snobby tone that Berlinger took to the movie, and then I felt like I was being insulted because it was just a very shoddily made movie that insulted my intelligence as a human being.
Did either of you guys read Melody Moss's review of the film when it first came out?
No.
I have it pulled up right here, and
I'll just quote pulled up, but I'll
quote one sentence, actually two sentences that she wrote about Book of Shadows. Here it is. This film is so bad, no amount of high-priced marketing tools, glitzy trailers, live webcasts, star-studded soundtrack CDs can save it, and the motivation behind this dreck is all too clear, pure and simple greed.
That sounds like a very, very well-written version of worst movie ever.
It really does.
Well, it's... You know what I mean? Like I feel like all of us felt robbed by that. All of us, I mean, obviously not, Jinx and the people that actually enjoyed it, but I think all of us felt that okay, they're trying to do these crazy marketing like the first film, but they're missing what made it so magical. And it feels right from the beginning, this feels like a cash grab, whereas the first film felt like filmmakers trying to tell a good story, and it ended up being a success.
So I love the first 3 minutes and 22 seconds of this movie. And I don't mean that then it's all downhill. I actually really love the first, although I have one quibble, and we'll kind of go over that in a minute. I love the idea. You open up with this footage, media footage from MTV News and Conan O'Brien, CNN, talking all about the phenomenon that was the Blair Witch Project. And then you go to the actual town of Burkittsville, and Berlinger, what's really funny in his commentary, talks about how he tried to shoot in Berlinger more and was basically told, get the fuck out. He was like, we want absolutely no part of you and your highfalutin movie crew. Get out of here. But he interviews actual residents from Burkittsville, as well as himself. He makes a cameo appearance in it, talking about how the movie impacted this really little town, this tiny, tiny little hamlet that no one would ever go to otherwise. And all of a sudden you have hundreds or thousands of people descending on it. That footage of the old woman who's I got rocks from my garden and sold them for $10. Don't sell many rocks online because it's too much to sell a rock. That was an actual person. That was fascinating. I'm I could easily, whether or not you treated the Blair Witch Project as real or just a movie, but it didn't have to be a documentary the whole way too, but an exploration of the Blair Witch phenomena and its effect on people would have been a fascinating movie that I would have loved to have seen.
Can't you imagine what Berlinger would have done with that?
But then you get this aerial shot of the woods and Marilyn Manson, and again, like I said before, it's the Steve Buscemi "Hello Fellow Kids" meme. And I get he didn't want that song, and that was not his editorial choice. That was a studio mandate. Yeah, but from that point on, I'm ugh.
But how many times
back to that
do
first
all
2
of
minutes.
us?
Yes, I'm sorry. I want to let Jinx in because I feel like
go for it. Go for it.
This is like, it does feel a little bit like we're
No. But in that first 2.5 minutes, don't you also? And I love that too. But don't you feel that sets up that sort of? I mean, that's what tees up what you saw as being like the sort of derisive look at fans of the first movie. I mean, it's all right there in that first 2.5 minutes. You know, when you have the sheriff yelling at essentially the stand-ins for us, the audience. You know, the people who love that movie. You know, basically chasing them out of the cemetery in the woods. It feels like, you know, everything that the movie is going to be on a certain level is held in the kernel of that first 2.5 minutes of the movie, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible, but I think because you get so little of it there that you could have gone in a million different directions. I think that derision comes later in the movie and the way the story kind of just plays out with your core cast of characters. Like, that's what I found troubling.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into that with the characters and what they all mean. But I will. This is a weird aside, but can I ask, have either of you guys ever been to the real Burkittsville?
Not yet.
No, I haven't.
Have you?
Yes, I took a trip to Gettysburg once. Being such a horror nerd, I wasn't actually there to visit Gettysburg as a site, although I did, and it was that's a whole other story. But yeah, I went to a horror convention there. I forget what it was called. I don't think it exists anymore. But as I was leaving, you know, I knew that I had to cut through part of Maryland, and I was like, you know, just for the hell of it, I wonder, you know, and you know, I pulled out the Garmin and checked it out, and sure enough, I was 28 minutes away from Burkittsville, and I was like, get the fuck out of here. So
how do you not? Yeah, of course.
How do you not? And I went, and it is such a small, unbelievably small town. It's a one road sort of town. It's a tiny little village, and yet there are 4 markers for the town. Like if you drive to the end of the town, you know, in a circle, like you see 4 different entrances with that Burkittsville sign, not the one from the movie. They actually had to redesign it because apparently so many people would steal the original sign because it was, you know, it looked like what was in the movie. But you know, I guess all of the hatred had long since left by the point that I got around to actually visiting the place. I think this was around 2009, 2010 that I went. And, but, you know, I just walked around. I bumped into a couple of people. Weirdly enough, it was the same day that this person who lived literally a stone's throw outside of the town was opening up like an apple cider kind of stand out of their house. And it was delicious, by the way. But there was this little old shop there on the corner that looked like it had been there for a couple of hundred years. In fact, I'm certain it had been, but it looked like it had been perfectly preserved. And even the guy who ran the shop looked like he was from, you know, the 19th century. It was amazing. And he was very polite. He was very cordial, you know, but he was much more interested in talking about Burkittsville as a town that had a significant historical role to play in, you know, the Civil War. And, you know, anytime I tried to bring up the movie, like he knew that's why I was there. You know, he knew that's why I was wanting to chat about it. But you know, he was polite, but you could tell it's kind of an embarrassment to them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, watching the opening minutes of Book of Shadows, I mean, it seems like a pretty accurate, you know, slice of life as to what it must have been like in Burkittsville just right after the release of that movie.
How long ago was that?
That I went there?
Yeah.
It was like 2009, 2010, so it's been about a decade. I think it's
reversed at this point. Now they...
Well, I wonder what the Wingard film did.
There's a Blair Witch... Well, that was Vancouver. That's actually... When we talk about the Wingard film, my actual biggest complaint about the movie is that the woods don't look or feel anything like the original movie. I know it's a nitpick, but...
That's your biggest complaint, though?
It's my biggest complaint. Well, there's others. We'll see. Listeners, you're going to have to tune in another week. You know, my biggest complaint is it didn't have the owl making sexy eyes at people, I guess. So I think that maybe I think maybe distance between the movie coming out has made the town embrace it a bit more. There's actually like a Blair Witch experience now. Like they have guided tours. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're doing like we're actually going to be interviewing the dude that kind of puts all of that together. I think I was actually supposed to do it tonight and I forgot.
That cool a decade ago. Damn it.
Yeah. So I think I'm gonna road trip it out there next summer myself. Just have any of you guys ever been to Salem, Mass, by any chance?
I'm dying to go. I haven't.
I live a little bit further away now, but I used to go to Salem a lot. What's funny is their historic attractions about witches have not changed since I used to go there in field trips in grade school 35 years ago. So that's kind of awesome. Charming. But there is in the town square, there's a statue of Samantha from the show Bewitched, which is it's kitschy and all, but it's kind of in really bad taste because 19 people were executed unjustly, and then you have this cute statue,
same sort of really thing. I don't know if it's. I don't know.
But Salem is amazing, and I love it. Okay, yep.
I lived about an hour away from Point Pleasant. Are you familiar with that place?
No.
When I was up north, it was the site of the Silver Bridge collapse, and it's it's known as basically being the site of the initial sightings of the Mothman. So if you watch the Mothman Prophecies, it is set in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And it's the same thing. There's this kitsch value to the entire town where you can go to the Mothman Museum, where they have this rubber Mothman hanging from the ceiling. And they have, news clippings from way back in the day when all of it happened. I don't know if you're familiar with the sort of mythology of the character or not, but they have this big silver Mothman statue in the town square, and a stone's throw away they have a sort of marker that shows where the Silver Bridge collapsed. Now, it's fun to go to the town and to go to the Mothman Festival. There is actually a Mothman Festival, good God. And to visit the Mothman Museum, see the Mothman statue, have Mothman pancakes and a Mothman Frappuccino. But again, a stone's throw away, you have the site of an actual tragedy where dozens and dozens and dozens of people lost their lives. And I don't know that it has the sort of weight that it should. And it sounds like the same thing with Salem. I don't know. It's strange. It's a bit, there's this uneasy feeling anytime I go there where it's like, I know this is supposed to be fun, but also, it's also a memorial site.
Right. So I think we've kind of gotten off the track here a little bit, as we're prone to do. I feel like I'm avoiding talking about the movie at this point. So I guess Jinx, you're the highest of the three on this movie overall, and I'm trying my best to give it a chance right now. I really am. Once we get into the meat of the movie, once we meet Jeff and Steven and Erica, Kim, and Tristine, what attract, as you're watching this, what about this group did you find compelling or enjoyable, or just I want to follow them on this journey?
That's a great question. There's something about it. I and I gotta imagine a lot of detractors are going to laugh at me for this, and I completely understand it if you guys want to throw stones, but I like the characters. I like the actors. I like their chemistry. I think they're saddled with some really unfortunate dialogue at times. But I think for the most part, I think the chemistry really works. From the moment we meet them in the van the first time and, they're making that trip to pick up Kim in the cemetery, just kind of the banter that immediately sets up who these people are and what their point of view is. I was kind of in at that point. I didn't mind taking that ride straight away. And, out of all of them, I think that Jeffrey Donovan is probably the standout. I think he gives his character a lot of life and energy. Really? You didn't care? Well, okay. I get that.
I'm sorry. Keep going. Sorry. Shouldn't have done that.
But no. So yeah, no, it's from the moment the movie begins, I enjoy those characters and I enjoy taking that trip. Now, I will say, in addition to the dialogue not always serving the performances, I will also say that unlike the original Blair Witch, which, had three characters that I felt like were real people, just very, very real, in this, all the characters feel like movie characters with capital M, capital C, they feel like constructs, which they're kind of meant to be in a way, but it doesn't stop me from actually finding them kind of engaging and taking that trip with them.
The problem is, and I'm not even saying that as just talking shit about the movie. I think when you have films that kind of not make fun of, I don't think it was Berlinger's intention to make fun of, but to set these kind of trope-like characters and these cliche characters that represent like basically the worst of every kind of fan. You know, the goth girl, the kind of mentally unstable. You know what I mean? Like I almost feel like it could be taken almost as an insult. You know,
right.
It feels like you're watching a satire that doesn't come off satirical, but instead comes off like the opposite of a love letter to what came before it.
Right. I feel like Jeffrey Donovan. Mm-hmm. Imagine if Dude, Where's My Car was a stage production on off Broadway. He would have been like the third understudy to Ashton Kutcher. Like that's his character in this movie.
That's unfortunate because
he's gone on to have the best career of.
Have you guys seen Villains?
I have not.
Oh, it's coming out pretty soon. Jeffrey Donovan, him, Bill Skarsgård, Micah Monroe, like that's him like going off. You know what I mean? Like in Book of Shadows, it just feels like there's something there, but like I don't know if it was the film, I don't know if it was the script or what, but man,
it's a rushed production, so
yeah, exactly.
You don't have a lot of time to really inhibit these characters, and I think the thing with the first movie is Josh, Heather, and Mike weren't A, themselves, and B, really had to live it out in real time. And we got 87 minutes of basically 24/7 terror for them for a week. And we got the best 87 minutes of that, where this, we just get like something that's really rushed. I actually, rewatching this movie, really liked Kim Director in this movie, the goth girl. I thought she was probably the standout for me in this movie. I enjoyed watching her a bit more, not just because she's like stunningly beautiful in it, but just also like her performance was fun, even though it's cliched, even again like cliched goth, but seemed to be the only one that had these moments that are like, look, just because I wear black clothes, I'm not a complete freak. Like, she actually had more human moments overall. Although how she got these like kind of mind reading powers and the ability to tell somebody was pregnant by looking at them for 5 seconds, I still don't understand.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I admit that freely. I do not like that aspect of the movie at all.
So, and Berlinger said the character of Erica was kind of like a olive branch of sorts to the Wiccan community, who felt very offended by the Blair Witch Project. They were up in arms saying, like, this is not how witchcraft is portrayed. It's not evil. It's a religion that celebrates nature. And all of those things are true. However, Erica in this movie is the embodiment of every annoying cliche that anyone has ever had about Wiccans. This whole like, oh, Mother Earth, may I please have this? Thank you very much. Like, nobody does this. And it's one of those things where like that kind of person makes me hate quote unquote witches more than any folklore about witches. Like, it's so annoying. It's like, this is why people hate you. It's like, I respect vegans and respect veganism. I don't respect that vegan who runs around yelling blood mouth and you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, well, this is like such an, like, you're not doing this community any favors with this kind of character.
I do practice, it's very much like a huge part of my life. I don't talk about it that much, but I'm very much into that. And I'm more offended by the quote unquote accurate portrayal in Book of Shadows than the dramatized nothing like reality of the first film. Like it's a movie. I could enjoy the craft without being offended. You know what I mean? Like it's a movie.
I think we lost Jinx.
No, I'm still here. I will say out of the 5, and I've, none of this is revelatory. I mean, all the stuff that I'll mention here, I mean, Berlinger notes it all in his commentary, but yeah, each of the 5 characters are meant to stand in for an idea, like an aspect of the type of viewer or fan that the Blair Witch sort of had. You mentioned Kim, she's goth, she's an outsider, she connected to the occult aspect of, first film. Erica obviously represents Wiccans and witches. And, it is a shame. I think she is the sort of worst drawn character of the group. I like the actress. I think she does her best. I think she is kind of like charming at times. At times, I think some of her dialogue is just god awful. But overall, like I kind of bought that character, and I bought her as a stand-in, trying to, defend at least that aspect of, or that sort of that idea, that Wiccans were, offended by the portrayal in the movie. But
she was like, "We're a persecuted minority," is one of the lines that this poor woman is forced to deliver with a straight face. Like, "We're a persecuted minority for 3,000 years. Burn a candle." Ugh.
And maybe that's part of the rushed aspect of the movie, is that, he knew that character should be there, but he wasn't necessarily given the opportunity or time to flesh her out so that she was actually, she did the job that he wanted her to do, whereas, the flip side of that is Steven and Tristan, even though I think they're more annoying in certain ways than Erica, I think they're better drawn characters, and they better sort of exemplify the characters that, Berlinger wanted them to be, which, maybe it was easier for him because, essentially who are they? They're intellectuals who debate the merits of the film's mythology. I imagine that was easier for him to tap into, but I don't know. I can't. Here's the thing. I can't even defend that some of these characters are not as well drawn as they should be. But again, going back to it, in your question that you asked me initially, why am I willing to go along with these characters? Why do they draw me in? And I think it really is just because of the chemistry. Whether it be, whether that's all the writing, whether it's simply the actors and their abilities, sort of trying their best to overcome the writing. I don't know, but I love that cast. I love that grouping of characters, and I more than anything, that's what draws me in every time.
I think what bothers me about it, and maybe it's just a personal thing, is you get a man who made the quintessential documentary about 3 young men who were unfairly crucified, basically, and put on death row because they were looked at, because they were into horror films and paganism and stuff. They were looked at like they were Satanists and evil and murderers. You get the guy who made such an important documentary to make a movie, and he makes our lead characters the very thing that those innocent people in his documentary were accused of. Like it feels to me, and I'm not trying to just cap on the movie, but it just feels like, really, like it's such a bad look for Berlinger for me. I can never get past that.
Can I read you from Roger Ebert's review of the movie?
Sure.
I highlighted this before we did our show before, and this ties exactly into what Jerry just said here. So this is from Roger Ebert's review of the Book of Shadows back in 2000. So the movie shows no special insight that made it necessary for Berlinger to direct it. It's a muddled, sometimes atmospheric effort that could have come from many filmmakers. At the same time, because of loaded characters and dialogue, BW2 supplies ammunition to those who think the Arkansas prisoners are guilty. I can imagine a preacher thundering from his pulpit. This Berlinger comes down here and makes a couple of propaganda films making us look bad. Then what does he do? Makes a film glorifying black magic and witches.
Yep.
If the film had argued against the mindsets that essentially framed the West Memphis Three, that would be one thing, but it doesn't. This is not one of Joe Berlinger's proudest days.
Wow.
And I think that's a real point. Like, this Berlinger's thing was like, it's not supernatural, it's the people. And what you're saying now is, okay, now you're saying that people that have mental illness turn out to be killers. People that are into witchcraft turn out to be killers. People that are gothic and wear all black turn out to be killers. And you're right, Jerry, it does stand to the antithesis of what he aimed for and succeeded with in the Paradise Lost trilogies.
Well, it's almost like making a statement movie as a sequel to a movie that was entertainment. You know what I mean? Like, the Blair Witch Project is entertainment. It's terrifying entertainment. The second movie is Berlinger trying to take his documentary status and his success in making really great documentaries. I mean, he is one of my favorite documentarians around, which pains me to hate Book of Shadows as much as I do.
And like, I never want to go into a movie hating it. Right. We never want to go into it.
Exactly. I can't stand not liking a movie. It was one of the biggest disappointments recently when my wife and I went to see the newest 47 Meters movie, because I adore the first one. I walked into the new one so excited, and it was easily one of the 5 worst films I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so bad that I didn't even have to say anything. My wife looked over and like, oh no, do you want to go?
Better or worse than Jason Goes to Hell?
It's worse.
Wow.
Easily. I hate not liking a movie. And that's actually one of my favorite things about doing this podcast. I can't stand the Scream films, but goddamn, it was so much fun hearing about people that do. And I enjoy hearing Jinx talk about what he thinks works about this film.
So this is the point now, if Jinx wants to come back and join us.
Hi.
He's still there. So
still here.
I guess what I would like to know, because we've just said a lot, and I guess, like, what is it, like, what am I missing? And it could be very much that, like, there's something that I'm just missing here.
To go to Jerry's point for a second too, because I would like to talk about that, and if you guys don't mind, I am going to take the long way around here, because that is something that I used to read Ebert every week, and that was one of the first things that I read after seeing Book of Shadows and being like, holy shit, he's right? Like, that's really, really disturbing that a guy who would, make that documentary would then draw parallels to, the characters in his own movie, but ultimately make them guilty. So I've been thinking about that for the last 19 years. And every time I watch the movie, I try and I wrestle with that a bit. But, okay, yeah, I will take a long way around here. Bear with me. One of the more interesting moments for me in the movie is Tristan's miscarriage. It sets up the idea of there being blood in Jeff's van, which becomes a minor plot point in the investigation that wraps up the story. But it also makes us question straight away whether or not our heroes are at fault for what happens to them or what they experience. We wonder, did Ellie Kedward somehow make Tristan miscarry? Or did the fact that she was doing drugs and drinking herself silly out in the freezing cold forest perhaps contribute? It's the same thing with murders. Was that the witch somehow who framed our heroes, or did she possess them? Or did they just get really, really fucked up and do some really horrible shit under the suggestion of a mythology that they've pretty much carried into the woods with them? And that leads me to wonder what we're meant to make of the final unveiling of our remaining heroes as murderers. Merely considering the story, the world that's been set up here, are we meant to consider that we're viewing, a truthful version of the story, that ultimate revelation with the videos at the end? Did Jeff, Steven, Kim, Tristan, Erica, did they really carry out those murders which those videos depict? I mean, after all, there's Jeff's line early on in the movie about, what is it? About how film lies, but
video doesn't.
Video tells the truth. Video doesn't know how to lie, something like that. Well, the film, the 35 millimeter film portrayed our heroes as the victims of the witch, but the video unveiled them as the true villains. Or is this merely the work of the witch? Maybe the film is the truth and the video was manipulated by supernatural means. And it'd be cool to discuss that, and I want to because it's fun. But what really concerns me is this. Like, the film winds up with 3 people being jailed for murders we, the audience, are pretty sure they didn't commit. Only for the ending to pretty much say, no, they totally did it. If anybody else had made the movie, I wouldn't have batted an eye. But the fact that it was made by Joe Berlinger, who made Paradise Lost and Paradise Lost 2 and eventually Paradise Lost 3 long after this, which depicts the West Memphis 3, 3 young men who were in prison for murders that they didn't commit. It is uncomfortable that he chose with his first narrative feature to tell this particular story with that particular ending. And yeah, I mean, even after reading that review and watching, watching it made me wonder. Yeah, I mean, especially after Ebert's review, it made me wonder if Berlinger harbored any sort of doubts about his doc subject's innocence. But I will say this: with subsequent viewings, innocent people are endangered and die as a result. I honestly feel like they don't represent 3. I think they represent the Arkansas people and prosecution who were so very willing to let themselves get worked into a frenzy over the fact that their initial teenage suspects, the West Memphis 3, wore black and listened to metal and read Stephen King, that they weren't able to see past all of that to the truth. Now, The flip
but
side of that
by
is
that point, if you say that like they're not meant to represent the West Memphis Three, that's fine. Like not those three particular individuals, but I think you can make an argument that the movie is saying, but people that do participate in reading Stephen King, in witchcraft, and then you can say, but of course, like they can be more susceptible. Not necessarily they're going to do it, but they can buy into a certain mindset and be susceptible to doing it. We never get, like you hear Jeff described as someone who's been a pain in the ass in the town since he was 10 years old, but you never see any behavior from him that we, I guess, except for maybe, I guess that he's a crook with a really sweet bachelor pad. You never see any behavior that would lead you to think, why is he seen as this sort of thorn in the town side at all? Like, what is it about, his behavior that makes you think that? You're just meant to think like, nope, he's mentally unstable, so therefore he's going to become, this violent criminal, which is someone that is a mental health practitioner. Is like, that's a really dangerous mindset and a really irresponsible mindset to portray.
But does that not depend on where you ultimately come down when it comes to like the supernatural aspect of the movie? So I'll ask you guys, watching the movie, in the world of this movie, do you believe there is a Blair Witch or no?
I believe that Berlinger wanted it to be human murders.
Mm-hmm.
I think once I read that from Berlinger, like it was like a cement box for me.
I think you're meant to see them all as unreliable narrators.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I think what I've watched it's about 140-minute movie, I believe. What I've seen in the 135 minutes before the quote-unquote big reveal at the end is meant to just be from the point of view of 5 unreliable narrators.
Mm-hmm.
And I can get that. I completely understand. I don't know. I don't know that that's meant to demonize any one of them, because I mean, ultimately, if you're going to take those 5 characters and have them represent different groups, and they are our heroes, right? But I mean, we are going to put them in danger, and sometimes movies have really, really downbeat endings. I don't know that when I watch the movie, I don't know that I can buy that there's nothing supernatural afoot.
Okay.
I do see the movie as standing apart from the first movie. I think it stands apart from its continuity in the same way that, say, New Nightmare stands apart from, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies.
Sure.
I don't consider it in continuity, and yet I still think there is something supernatural afoot. Now, Berlinger can tell me I'm wrong all he wants to, but it's my movie to watch and judge too.
And that's a good point, and I understand that point. Like, just because you have to remove, the authorial, like, again, sorry, cold medicine. The author's, oh, Jesus Christ. You guys know what I'm talking about, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes.
You have to remove the intent of the filmmaker out from your own understanding and reading of the movie. I just have a really hard time doing that in this case. And I think it's because I am bringing bias into how I'm reading it based on my first reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that. I completely understand it. There is something about the movie, though, to me that feels inevitable, and not because of who those people were, but simply by virtue of the fact that they came into contact with an evil that they can't quite understand. I think, they are stand-ins for different types of audience members, throughout the story, certainly. But I think by the end, I find it hard to believe that Berlinger meant to demonize any of those people. And even if he did mean to, weirdly enough, and that would be a hell of a conversation to have with him, that's not the way I take it as a viewer. I feel like it's just, I think that's why the ending of the movie is, genuinely kind of horrifying. The fact that these people weren't in control of themselves, whether or not there was anything supernatural afoot or not. It's chilling to me. I mean, the final moment with Steven, breaking down, he is the guy who's been kind of like, Mr. Logic all the way from the beginning. And even for all of the things that he goes through, he's the guy who's kind of stayed solid all the way through. I wouldn't call him the rock of the group, but I mean, he's easily the least rattled until, the final moments in the factory. But at the end, to watch him out of all of them, just a jittery, crying, screaming mess is I don't know. It shakes me a little bit in a way that I love out of an ending like that.
Mm-hmm. I guess and I get what you're saying about Steven, him being the one who was like saying, this is all hysteria. This is all collective madness right now. There's nothing supernatural here. This is not what happened. Go ahead and play back the tape. He makes so many bad decisions before that. And just from the fact that what sort of PhD candidate or academic writing this massive research project doesn't back up their work? They're freaking out because their book is in tatters. And I'm like, did you print out a copy of it and then smash the hard drive to bits? What? And who? And they're we have all these one of a kind historical documents. Why would you take that shit camping with you? What would be the point of needing that on this trip? Why are you bringing these artifacts with you? And it's just that's a bad decision. Tristine, who's pregnant, is getting drunk and getting high with everybody. Some of the choice, I think that's one of the things is it's not just the point of view of Berlinger, but the clunkiness to the story. They wake up, they get blackout drunk, absolutely shattered drunk. We're gonna pull an all-nighter and get super fucked up and high. And the next day they wake up, they're we can't remember what happened. It must be supernatural. It's nah, dude, you put away a case of fucking Jack Daniels the night before each. That's what alcohol does to you people when you drink that much of it. And what I find super funny is the next night when they go on a quote unquote beer run, Kim buys a 6-pack of beer for the beer run for 6 of them. I'm what the? This is bad. Just little things like that just drive me absolutely up a fucking wall with this movie.
Well, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
No, there is. I mean, definitely. I would like to think that the characters would have been smart enough to realize that they needed to scale back their drinking to about a beer a night. But part of me also wonders if Kim just bought it for herself. No, I'm being silly, but. No, I hear you on Steven. I don't know how much backstory is given. If it was maybe cast aside in a moment that I have never quite grasped, but it felt like Steven and Tristan, they were researching on the run or on the move, they were picking up bits and pieces. They were not from Maryland, but they found themselves there, and presumably all of their research material, it didn't come from Boston. It would have come from the surrounding areas. One assumes. So I wonder if the fact that they're taking it with them is because, obviously they're on the road. They're not necessarily staying anywhere but, this guy's van and eventually his place, after the overnight in the woods didn't work out. But I wonder if we're meant to think that they simply acquired this stuff recently. They haven't had the chance to make copies yet. I don't know. And I would have found it deadly dull if they had actually delved into that. It doesn't bug me in a way, but
I didn't get that impression only because the glimpses you get of what they have, it's pretty well laid out by that point. You have something that approximates a finished product, something that he'd been doing for quite a while. So I don't think it was something they stopped over at the Burkittsville Historical Society, saw Bill Barnes and said, do you mind if we borrow the Cult of the Blair Witch book for a week? We're going to go for a little hike in the woods. And he was like, oh, sure, youngsters, go ahead, you little
Bill
scamps.
Would have totally let them, though.
Bill Barnes, salt of the earth. Total salt of the earth, man. So I didn't get that. This struck me as something they had been working on because their reaction to it. It wasn't you have a short little research paper to do. You do the opening paragraph or page or two and then forget to save it. This was years worth of work that had been gone up and those are only our notes we've backed up. It's you don't have drafts of it as an academic, as someone that is just it hurt. It hurt.
But if the events of the movie take place, though, in November of '99, and this was all spurred on by the release of the Blair Witch Project, which they had to have seen in late August, September, then I don't think they would have been putting in that much research time.
you're meant to believe it has. It's just, again, more laziness on the part of Artisan and Berlinger. You're meant to believe that this was a well-researched, near the finish line project. That's what you're meant to believe. Now, maybe the timeline doesn't line up, and perhaps the scope of their project expanded well past the Blair Witch and explored like hysteria and phenomenon stretching back for decades. And the Blair Witch was going to be part of what tied into that overall, and maybe would have been the capstone part of their project, cashing in on the kind of hysteria of the time and like the what it would have been. But it wasn't something where they just had like, it wasn't me doing my show notes, where I have maybe 5 to 6 pages typed up, and if I delete them accidentally, oh well. This was something they had that looked near the finish line. You're at least meant to believe that.
I will say this. I completely understand where you're coming from. If they had tried to work in that justification at any point in dialogue or exposition in the film, I would have pulled out my hair ages ago. Watching a movie that would have felt the need to again, to justify, something like that, something, that I think ultimately, what is the point of them having that research with them, but to, show that, in their fucked up state, they could, destroy it, but also to give us like a really great, really beautiful set piece. I love the look of the, the paper snowing down on them. Makes no sense whatsoever, but it is drop dead gorgeous. And I mean, we hold certain movies to different standards, and I get that. And if we hold Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2 against, say, the bar set by the Blair Witch Project, which is a movie that felt incredibly real, then yes, I think it fails on notes like that. But
shouldn't we though?
Well,
like, I'm not saying you're wrong, but like, how do we? The flip
side of that is like how often do you watch Lucio Fulci's The Beyond and get really pissed off at Do Not Entry? I mean,
but you had
well, it's a direct sequel to the first movie, though.
You had $15 million to make this movie versus something that costs less than most people's cars cost at this point to make. Not only that, you have this. You're given a cliff notes of years of backstory and mythology to build off of. And you are going to have the arrogance to say, no, I'm going to throw all that aside. I'm going to absolutely piss on the legacy of this movie. And this is what I'm going to come up with. And you have like zero attention to detail. You have, and I know that Berlinger did not want, he says in his commentary, the title card that comes up that says these are reenactments of actual events that happened in the summer of 1999 or fall of 1999. Excuse me here. And then you have the mini documentary that starts the movie, and 2 of the characters that are in the movie are in the mini documentary. So wait a minute, you're telling me that these are reenactments of events, but in your actual documentary part, here are the actors that are playing real characters. It's this laziness, and I think that's more an Artisan at that point. No one is going by looking at the logic of the movie and saying, like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Like, we're saying that these are dramatic reenactments. Why do we have the actors in the documentary at that point? That doesn't make any sense. That breaks the logic of the movie, and that's ridiculous.
But what tells us that documentary couldn't have been fucked with a bit? In those opening moments when I see Jeffrey Donovan playing Jeff Patterson, like, I think at least within the world of the movie, the idea is, well, they don't have footage of that guy, or maybe they're not able to use it. So why not use the star of your reenactments to pop in for that moment, like you would see on any sort of reenactment television show?
Well, I think it's the filmmakers expecting us as viewers to do that, to explain away their laziness that is offensive. You know what I mean? I think that people like you, which, I mean, bless your heart, it's awesome.
People like you're kind of...
No, I totally don't mean it that way. I mean, like, like you're looking into
personally,
it.
I took the bless your heart tougher than the first snack. But,
no, but what I mean is like, I feel like people like us who are very analytical about films, even if they don't work, maybe put too much into them at times and try to explain away their flaws. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Do you know what I mean?
That all comes down, but I mean, that all comes down to how the movie ultimately hits us in the heart the first time around. If we hate the movie, then we're going to rewatch it and find reasons to hate it, or we're going to find the reasons that we feel justify our hate. Well, I didn't like it because of this and this and this and this. You know, it's the same thing. You know, because I love the movie, I can say, well, I love the movie because this and this, and all of those things that you're knocking. Well, you know, I recognize that those are flaws, but here's what they mean to me. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, the tiny details when it comes to stuff like that, because you know, the movie as an entity, like as a full product, like, still works for me, you know.
If this movie landed, you know what, I cannot disagree with that. If this movie,
can I say one thing?
No.
Too?
If this movie, yes, you can. I'm sorry. Yes. You can.
No, but when it comes to Berlinger too, I want to defend him for a second too by saying that I don't think. Okay, we're all in agreement. Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2 is a terrible sequel. I think we can all at least agree on that. I certainly do. I don't think Berlinger is the villain here when it comes to this franchise. I think it's Artisan. I think it's them going to a guy who had no business making that movie. And if I recall correctly, I want to think it was like this Ain't It Cool News article from way back in the day, like an interview with him right before the movie came out, where he noted that he actually turned the movie down a couple of times.
You are correct.
You know, I mean,
he pitched some ideas. He's like, I would do this, this, or this with it. But when they offered them the movie, he's like, no, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. And so, like, they kept pushing it at him. And finally, he was like, okay, fuck it. Here's what I got. Now, I hate the Transformers franchise. But if you offered me a sequel, I would probably make a Transformers movie. And it would probably be the worst possible Transformers sequel that a fan could find themselves in. Like, I can't knock Berlinger too much for the movie that we wound up getting, because, rather the sequel, simply because, like, I think he was the worst possible guy to do the sequel. Like, he was the worst possible guy to carry on that franchise. But what he gave us, I think, is so interesting because it ended a franchise, because it was able to comment. I mean, how many other movies can you think of in a franchise that so sort of mercilessly take, you know, its predecessor to task? You know, I think
Halloween 6.
Really?
No, I'm just fucking with you.
So a quick programming note here, folks. Jerry actually had to step off of the rest of the episode just to deal with a little bit of a family situation. So it's just going to be Jinx and us and myself for the rest of the episode. So in case you don't hear Jerry again, he hasn't been kidnapped. Jinx didn't kill him for disagreeing with him. It's just he had to go, because sometimes we run a little bit long here. Anyway, back to our regular scheduled program. I'm going to agree with your point here. If this movie landed for me, I could easily say, you know what, magical realism, and it all works for me in the service of good storytelling. I actually, yesterday, my daughter, who's 9, was watching Cinema Sins on It Chapter 1. And, you know, she's seen It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2, because I'm a terrible parent that doesn't, you know, not only doesn't monitor what my child watches, but actively encourages her to watch these movies. But and I went into the other room and I said, Ada, like, look, I'm going to have you pause it. I'm not telling you not to watch this, because it's not an inappropriate thing to watch. Like, there are certain YouTube things where I'm like, nope, do not watch this. Absolutely not. Change it. Elm Street 3 is fine, but, you know, some kid's animated thing, no thank you. But I'm like, the reason I think you should maybe not watch it is because what these people do about movies is a thing that Daddy, someone who loves movies and talks about movies and adores them, they do something I hate, which is nitpick movies to death. And they just cut things to shreds. And they're people that have no talent of their own. and they're just like cutting things down. So maybe it's not the best way to learn about how to like critique an actual movie. But if you want to watch it, that's totally cool. Went back in the other room and she shut it off. She was like, all right, I'm going to watch this thing about squishy videos instead. So, I'm doing that with this movie because it just like, I just had such a negative adverse reaction to it.
And that's fair. And I think, I have been merciless with certain movies over the years that I can't connect to. And so, when that happens, I want to find the reason, right? I need to know why the movie didn't work for me, because I am rooting for every single film that I watch when I press play or sit down in a movie theater. I'm on the movie side. It has to work pretty damn hard, I feel, to lose me. And when that happens, when I can't connect, then I need to justify that to myself. Now, equally, I watch a movie like Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, and, a movie which is almost universally reviled. And I have to wonder why it does work for me. And ultimately, I don't think, I could sit here and I could rehash everything that Berlinger talks about in his documentary. I can talk about the 5 characters representing, the 5 different groups. I can talk about, what is that phrase that he uses in the, I don't know if you've listened to the commentary, but he talks about. Yep. Okay, so, that phrase he talks about, the dangers of blurring, fantasy and reality, or, fiction and reality. I forget exactly what the line is, which is crazy because he says it 87 times in the commentary.
Right.
Ultimately, all of that stuff doesn't matter, I don't think. There's something about the movie, like some X factor, that just clicks with me. I love the atmosphere. I love the dread. I love how the characters interact, all while understanding that some people find this completely free of atmosphere and dread, and they do not like the characters and how they click. And so I think, as much as I would like to be able to defend this movie to all of the listeners out there wondering what the hell I'm thinking, as much as I would like to, roll out the scroll and be like, here is why Book of Shadows is actually a great movie. If you don't like it, if you've given it a chance, if you've spent the last 2 decades hating it and occasionally giving it, another shot over the years, and you still hate it, I'm not the guy who's going to be able to convince you otherwise, because I think ultimately why the movie works for me is something that I can't really describe. It's some way that I connect to the movie, and I hate to admit it because it makes me seem, perhaps a bit dumb even, but I don't completely know why the movie hits me the way it does, but I love it. And every time I watch it, it hits me the same way.
But I don't think people are ever dumb for liking what they like. I mean, if you like, as long as it's something that's, not going to harm other people. Like if you're like, I'm into, taking a riding lawnmower and running over children with it, well, maybe you want to curb that as a habit.
Okay, sit in your ivory tower and judge me again.
Yes, I know. Fine. Sorry. I know. I'm such a prick. I felt like as a viewer, like I said, I was being insulted. And it wasn't just the fact that like the campfire scene, I think there were some fun moments in it, but I think I remember the moment where they're like, I don't understand how these 3 in the woods didn't have sex with one another. Like it's a great stress reliever. And Jeff is like, well, I'm stressed right now. We talked about this on our Blair Witch show. Part of what I really love is that these characters go into the woods and there's no sexual tension between them. Nobody wants to fuck one another. And part of it is the reason for that is when you listen to our interview with Eduardo Sanchez, he talks about how Mike and Josh really could not get along with Heather in the early going. And I don't want to reveal many spoilers for the interview, but I think at one point they actually approached Eduardo and Dan and said, look, as characters, if someone was acting like this, we would bail. We're out of here. Peace out. And we just get up in the middle of the night and leave. So I love that there's no sexual tension in that movie. And I think that's kind of like turned on its head here and kind of questioned, I guess, in a way that makes you feel like, oh, I guess why didn't I think of that before as a viewer? And I think I'm doing a pretty poor job of explaining that right now, but I think the movie really goes wrong for me is when they leave the woods. Once they're out of the woods, the remaining hour in the movie takes place in this dude's warehouse, and it's a boring place to be for an hour. And not only that, there's no reason for them all to be there still. You got blackout drunk, you don't remember what happened. Steven and Christine just lost their baby. Why are they going to this stranger's warehouse? and hours after they, again, lost their baby, the night after she got blackout drunk and high and miscarried because she got blackout drunk and high. Like, there's just so many irresponsible decisions that are made that lead them to the warehouse that as a viewer, I'm like, if I don't have any investment in these characters and don't care what happens to them, why am I spending another hour here in a really boring location where very little happens?
I hear you. The way I always took it, the way they wind up in that factory is simply the fact that, I mean, obviously some amount of trauma happened to them all beyond the miscarriage even, and whether we want to believe that that's the fact that they went out in the woods and slaughtered a bunch of backpackers, or simply, they were under the influence of the witch, but they woke up knowing that something was wrong. And so even though they're all strangers, I like the idea that they feel the need to cling to one another in a way. And now would I buy that they would go to that factory, Jeff's place, for a bit? I do. And for that very reason, do I buy that they would just stay there indefinitely? No, not at all. But I think the mystery ultimately starts to present itself, bit by bit. And that's kind of what keeps them there. I don't think any of them planned on staying there, for the long haul, but at least until they could suss out exactly what had happened to them. So that never bugged me, not even a little bit. As far as the location, yeah, I mean, I get it. That's a location we've seen how many times, in movies in a way. But I don't know. I like the idea that it was kind of like an industrial setting, but it it felt like the forest had already started to take it over again, and I like that. There's that amazing shot. Who's the actually made a point of writing her name down. Was it Nancy Schreiber who DP'd the film? And there's that gorgeous time-lapse shot on the outside of the factory, Jeff's home, when the light is sort of spilling through the trees. And it's just so sinister in a way. And I love it for that. But I'm sorry, what was the question?
No, we got it. Yep. You hit at a point earlier that I would like to go back and have you address with more detail. You actually said the villain of this isn't Joe Berlinger, it's Artisan. And I agree. By and large, if you're slicing up the blame pie, you got to give the bulk of that pie to Artisan overall for the decisions they made, and for not only the decisions they made that led up to the movie and rushing it out, but how much they I have a real problem with the studio that basically goes after a creator and says, we really want you to do this project. We really respect your vision. We really think you're going to bring something new and different to the table, and then butchers that vision and doesn't trust the creator and the director to bring his or her vision to life.
And do you feel like that
interferes?
Bullshit in a way too, that I honestly feel like the only reason they pursued a documentary filmmaker in the first place is because they thought that was the best possible chance they had at somebody running and gunning a sequel for them and getting it done in the space of a year. I don't think they gave a shit about him as an artist. I don't think they gave a damn about him as a storyteller. I really don't. Especially given how they treated him, after he turned in his director's cut.
Yeah. I don't know. Because his documentaries have been so critically acclaimed. The fact that they wanted him to keep, I think you could have gotten a young buck and a young up-and-coming director or a young indie hotshot that is able to crank out a movie rapid fire very quickly, and you could have done that and just stood over their shoulder and basically said, you're directing this in name only. I think they could have done that very, very easily, and I think that there was, at least at some level high up, there was somebody that said this is the right person because of his documentary background, even though we're not making a documentary again or a documentary type of movie again. And again, I argued earlier that the Blair Witch Project is not a documentary. It is mostly a bunch of random footage spliced together, which is what it's meant to be. It's not a documentary, or meant to be seen as that. But tell me what because you've kind of gone to the mat for what you think the Berlinger cut would have been. What would have ultimately? What do you think that would have added to what we see with Book of Shadows? Like, how would that have been different? And what do you think the ultimate intent would have been?
Oh, I don't. That's the thing. I don't know that I'm willing to go to the mat for the Berlinger cut. I think it's interesting, the idea, especially listening to him talk about it and what he wanted. Beyond the fact that I think every director should be able to to give us their own vision, even though it may not reach the masses on opening weekend. At least give us that on DVD down the line so that it can be preserved. And like I was mentioning earlier in the previous chat, a lot of his changes are things that I don't know would completely work for me. But I think if we were to get his cut of the movie, it feels like it would be even less of a horror film. It would be kind of a soft thriller at best, I mean, without those jarring cuts of gore and the murders, with all of the interrogation stuff, not interspersed throughout the main narrative, but just being one big 8-minute chunk at the very end. I don't know that I would like it as much. And I hate to say that because I really want to see it. I want to see what that guy intended. But every choice that he says he would have made with his cut, I look at it and I'm like, well, maybe, but I don't know. And I can't say for certain that it would work. All I know is that what we have, I like. Now, can I turn the question around and ask you, like, with the movie that you dislike, the way that it exists right now, you've listened to the audio commentary, so too what Berlinger intended. Do you think you would like his cut more than what we have right now?
It's hard to say. I think that I would, because ultimately the Blair Witch Project, why that worked for me, it's more about what I don't see. That to me was far scarier. And one of the things I argue for in our show about the Blair Witch Project is how it turns around the point of view. Usually when you've seen movies like Halloween and Friday the 13th, you're in the killer's point of view. This time I'm in the victim's point of view. I can only see what they are seeing, and my mind is filling in the blanks at that point. And I find that far scarier than any monster or boogeyman you're going to put up on screen. Artisan gives me these quick, gory bits throughout the movie that take me out of what I'm watching and are distracting. And those would not have been in there. The interrogation scenes just seem haphazard and randomly thrown in. And part of it, too, is the character of Sheriff Cravens is so over the top. And that was by intent on Berlinger's behalf part.
Yeah, it was essentially Mark Myers, right?
Exactly. It was based on the over-the-top foil, I guess the character I would call a foil, who was adamant these kids were guilty in Paradise Lost Parts 1 and 2, who, if you see Part 3, he then goes completely over to the other side. But he's still just as much of a freak and annoying. He's on our team, so it's like Bernie Bros. Like, technically they're Democrats, but they're still annoying as fuck.
Oh god. That's a fair point.
So,
although if I could say something for 2 seconds, I will say that the scene in the third film, Third Paradise Lost, I'm forgetting the subtitle to it, but the moment when Damien Eccles and Byers meet for the first time, even though Byers is still way, way out in left field there, and even though like all of the shit that he talked about these guys to begin with, there was something kind of touching about their meeting in real life, and the two of them able to forgive one another, not for, I mean, obviously not for the murder or anything, which obviously Eccles did not commit, but just this sort of like blind hatred each of them had for a while, and the things that they said about one another. Byers blamed him of murder, and Eccles blamed him right back. And the fact that they were able to come together at the end, I don't know, that really hit me pretty hard in the third movie. Anyway, sorry, I am.
No, that's okay.
I tend to do this on my own podcast. I digress a hell of a lot. So,
well, I can't wait to guest. So
please.
No, I'm trying to remember where I was going there. So I don't know. I think I would have gotten a more subdued movie, and I think that would have been fine. I don't need I think the biggest problem I have with this movie is it's like someone at Artisan took notes that we need more blood, we need more gore, we need more quick cuts, we need more and more and more. We need it to look like every other horror movie that was coming out in the late 90s, early 2000s. And to that, I would say, did you watch the movie you're making a sequel of? Do you understand what worked about that movie? And to me, maybe it is too much of a course correction for some of the backlash of the Blair Witch Project. Okay, like, yes, you went to see an unconventional movie and we made a ton of money on it, but you're complaining that it was too unconventional for your taste. We're going to go way far in the other direction at this point and give you something completely generic. Like, you like scary ghost kids? We'll give you a couple scenes with scary ghost kids. You guys like that new metal rock and roll music? We'll give you Marilyn Manson. You guys like blood and gore? We'll give you like an over-the-top bloody and gory sequence. You guys like titties? We'll give you some titties. Which is like, it's all over the place.
And I will say, you saying that too, it reminds me, I wanted to mention this too. And watching the film again, I realized the movie never really terrified me at any point. It's never, the ending I think is horrifying in its own right, but for a completely different reason. It didn't chill me or frighten me or keep me awake at night the way the first movie did. But, for all that, I'm not a blood and gore kind of guy. I'm fine with it, but I don't need that. That's not the reason that I need those inserts in there. It's, it's the same thing. The ghost kids are so poorly realized. None of those moments are scary. None of them work.
It's like, I think I put it in my notes here. It's like Newsboys, the ghost movie, just like it's just, I will say, you just said like the ending of the movie is really chilling, and that I'll agree with. Like that, I will say, no matter what your reading of the movie is, if you think that it's supernatural, then you can say, oh my God, like these people were manipulated by this supernatural force and they really do have no recollection of what they did. That's a really scary thing. When you go back and look at the videotape and like how it contradicts everything. So I can say, like, no matter how you read the movie, that ending can be a bit chilling either way.
But the movie as a whole, I would say, is not terribly scary, but it made me think, this last rewatch about how, I don't always need horror movies to horrify me. I don't need to always be scared. That's not the main reason I go to see them. Most of the time I just like watching really, really dark dramas, Sure. Now, if they can scare the hell out of me, all's the better. But, sort of leveling the charge against Book of Shadows that it's not terribly scary. Like, that's not a huge knock for me. But I completely understand if some people, are like, what are you, fucking crazy? Like, why follow up an incredibly scary movie with a movie that isn't really scary at all? I get that, but it's not, I didn't need that out of it.
Right. Well, I think I've said everything I can say about this movie. We've done about 2.5 hours on it.
We have not.
Between the two recordings, we're closing in on about 2.5 hours at this point. It doesn't feel like it, I know. So I think it'll probably be like 2 hours when all is said and done. But that's, I think I've said everything I can say. This is a movie that every few years I will put in and be like, maybe this will be the time I appreciate it more. And I will say, like, rewatching it again for the show, as hard as I am in on it, there are some things I can't appreciate. And I think not in the movie that I can appreciate more, studios, like, don't rush movies out and don't fuck with the artist. Let them do their thing. It maybe still would not have been my cup of tea overall, but I think I would have gotten something better. I do, to your point, I think the most fascinating thing is how this movie literally killed the franchise dead between 2000 and 2016. Just absolutely, like, old Yellard, the Blair Witch Project. You could not do anything with this aside from like CD-ROM games to your, Windows 95 computer for years is the most you would get from the Blair Witch Project series. It's amazing how something went from being such a phenomenon into this, to like being kind of out of the eye. And not only like it was out of the cultural eye, like people didn't even think about this movie for years, it seems. And now it seems like it has gotten its just due. And it has been kind of recognized as for the groundbreaking film that the original was. But it just seemed like for years, like people just kind of, oh yeah, that's the one where the girl looks in the camera and boogers come out of her nose and nothing happens. Like that's what people remembered, and unfairly. So
I agree. If I can give one last defense of the movie,
of course you can.
To everyone out there, if you only saw it the one time ages ago, maybe give it another shot. You know, if you do revisit it every once in a while during a franchise rewatch and you find that you hate it every time, yeah, I can't imagine you're ever going to be one back. But I don't know. Watching it again, it sort of cemented my I don't know, weird, unexplained love for the movie. I love that it's a great extension of Berlinger's documentary work. I think it's beautifully made. It features some really impressive set pieces. I love the documentary, like, asylum opening. I love the paper snowing sequence. I even think Jeff finding Erica's body is, fairly clever in the way that it's set up. I like the finale. I like the characters. I like the actors. I like the sort of tightening dread that squeezes throughout. And I love that Berlinger somehow managed to use a franchise installment to try and tear down the legacy of its predecessor, because he must have felt in some way morally obligated to, like, even though that was so wrong of Artisan to have chosen him for this project. I love that. I think it's incredibly ballsy that he did that. But even that, I mean, I love the atmosphere. I love the sequences in the forest. I love the factory home. I love Nancy Schreiber's photography. I love, Carter Burwell's score, I think, is actually really fantastic. Do I think the movie is perfect? No. A few films are, but I would even say, in all fairness, that the movie misses more than it hits overall. But for me personally, what works about it really works. I think it's a smart companion piece to Berlinger's work. I think it's a clever, if blunt, commentary on the original movie's promotion and success. And mostly, for me, I think it's just a fun ride with a set of characters that I enjoy spending time with.
So to me, it still is a failure as a movie, but it's an interesting failure. And I'll take that over some other movies that we're going to eventually cover here on the show, because I do think that as much as I don't like the movie, I do like talking about it. I do enjoy the conversation. It's something that I can't just dismiss out of hand. Like, we just got done covering the Friday the 13th series, and, like, I have no need to ever watch Jason Takes Manhattan ever again. And it was a hard show to get through, because there's just not a lot of interesting things to say about that movie. And that was a hard show to do. And I think we succeeded in, having a fun conversation. But, man, it took a lot of work. This was, as much as we kind of butted heads over how we see this movie, it was a interesting and fascinating discussion that I can look back on and go, you know what? Yeah, I can understand why someone appreciates the movie. It's not, to me, like, I don't understand how anyone likes Mandy. You're all terrible people.
Come on.
I hate that movie so much.
And
fucking Nick Cage, man. Fucking Nick Cage, man. I remember when Nick Cage could really act.
He is responsible for one of my favorite performances in all of cinema.
The Wicker Man remake?
Oh, no, sir. No. Leaving Las Vegas. You know what's funny, though? I mean, two of my favorite performances of all time in anything would be Cage in Leaving Las Vegas and Ellen Burstyn in Requiem for a Dream. And they were both in the Wicker Man remake. And before it came out, I was like, my God, look at that cast. Neil LaBute is writing and directing? Oh, my God. I could not wait to see that movie.
Sadly,
I saw that movie.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Disappointed doesn't cover it, sir. I worked at a theater, watched it after hours. I invited a friend along, and he, I think, was borderline terrified of me by the end of my 30-minute post-movie ranting about how much I hated that fucking movie.
I tapped out on Neil LaBute after In the Company of Men.
Really?
I saw that in theaters, and it was so cruel.
It is.
Oh, that movie is such a cruel. I'm like, nope, don't need to see any more of this dude. So, yeah, that's where I stand.
I do think that Your Friends and Neighbors and Nurse Betty are worth a look.
Okay.
If you get the chance. But,
okay.
Yeah, that first one is, oof.
Yeah, that movie hurt to watch. That end is just, like, unnecessarily cruel. All right, so, Jinx, we're going to wrap up here. So, tell our listeners where they can find you. Like, tell us about Scream Addicts and your writing. You know what? I'm going to start that over. Give me 1 second here. Sorry, sure. Dude. I am like,
no, you're good
at this point. So, Jinx, we're going to wrap up here for tonight. But tell our listeners like where they can hear you, where they can find you. Yeah. let's go from there.
So I write for Bloody Disgusting from time to time. I occasionally do a column called Second Chances, where I give I give a movie that I didn't love initially a second chance and rewatch it with an open mind and open heart and see where it lands. And sometimes it gives me an I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, where I ultimately find that the movie's kind of fun and silly, whereas previously I had hated it. But then sometimes it brings me a Wicker Man remake, which I never again. I will never watch that film again. I occasionally write about comics for the site. I occasionally write about movies that are kind of hidden gems. Beyond that, I have a podcast called Scream Addicts. Conceit of the podcast is essentially, I invite on creatives in horror, be they writers, directors, producers, actors, musicians, fellow podcasters. You're welcome on.
Excellent. I'll take you up on that.
Absolutely. But instead of chatting about their own stuff, they choose a single horror movie that they love to talk about. And, we basically rap about it for about an hour. So other than that, you can just find me on Twitter. I am at Jinx1981. That's JINX1981. And please say hello and tell me to your heart's content how much I'm wrong about Blair Witch 2.
But do so in a kind and supportive way, folks.
I'm used to getting beaten up over it. It's completely cool.
So, again, thanks for joining us tonight, Jinx. Thanks for, again, I think you knew coming in like how Jerry and I felt about this movie. So,
yeah,
you are a very brave man for coming in. And I hope we kind of took it easy overall. To our listeners, we will be back next week finishing our coverage of the Blair Witch series with 2016's The Blair Witch. Really quick, because you kind of made a comment earlier, like, you like that one, though? Like, what was your thought on the Wingard Barrett movie, really quick?
I think it is not at all a bad movie. I think it's perfectly entertaining. I think the biggest problem I have with that movie is that my expectations for it were so astronomically high. I had read some reviews for it that basically positioned it as being this generation's The Exorcist. And between that and, my sort of dormant fandom, getting kicked into high gear, I went back and reread all the spin-off novels and The Secret Confession of Rustin Parr, The Blair Witch Dossier. I rewatched all of the movies and all the little mini docs, the Ben Rock stuff. So that by the time I went to the premiere of that movie, I was just amped to see this film. And, by the time I got to the end of it, I was just kind of like, it was fun. It was good. Yeah. It was well made. It was fun enough.
I remember going to a critic screening of it, and I am not part of the Boston Online Film Critic Association, but I ended up going or like sitting around a bunch of them, and one of them he kind of was writing for us at the time when I was actually doing a site. And I remember like walking out of the movie thinking, it was okay, I guess. And they were ripping the movie to shreds outside, and they were so arrogant about it that I'm like, I can see everything they were saying. I'm like, I think I like this movie a lot more because of their critique of the movie. So, but I'm looking forward to kind of talking about that next week. To our listeners, we will be back again. I am going to bed because I am super, super, super tired. My job requires me to basically hear the dramatic intrigue of 7th and 8th grade girls all day as a school counselor. Like, I basically am the person people come to when they're having a bad day, and it's all girl drama all day. Oh, my God. Did you go away?
No, I'm still here. I'm just
processing that thought.
Yeah, I'm weighing that right now and just being like, you know what? I work at a car dealership. I think I win here.
I love it, but it's like, who likes who? Who's talking shit about who? Who has beef with who? Like, in about a week, I think girls are going to come in, like, braid my beard and, like, tell me weird shit. So, all right, I got nothing else. Thanks for coming on with us tonight, man.
Thank you so much. It was a blast, and I very much appreciated the opportunity to defend a movie that doesn't often get defended.
I'll edit that part out because I just so recently, like, people were up in arms because there's going to be a remake of Con Air, And it's like, how can you remake Perfection? And I'm like, really? Like, it's a fun 90s action movie, but let's not have this group hysteria that Con Air is some sort of cinematic masterpiece that's above. If you can remake Halloween, you can remake Con Air, people. Let's not be stupid. I don't know.
Yeah, I want to ask the question, why remake Con Air? And not because I think it's untouchable, like some grand masterpiece that shouldn't be remade, but why bother? What was it about Con Air that needs a remake? What is it about Con Air that will appeal to people today? I really?
Yeah, there's money to be made.
They're remaking Face Off too. Now that pisses me off, but the original will stay where it is.
No, wait a minute. This whole talk about Con Air? No, it's Face Off that I was talking about. Holy shit. I got my Nick Cage movies mixed up. Jesus Christ. I am so fucked up on. This is going to be edited out and put at the end of the episode now as like a little. You have to listen to the post credits to actually hear this. It's Face Off. Face Off is no cinematic match. It's a fun movie. I like it. But it's, if you can remake, again, Halloween, you can remake Face Off. It's okay.